Tonight, if everybody can please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No, Mayor.
Okay. We have a motion to approve the agenda. I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as read.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Mayor Horn,
Aye.
Councilman Vosberg,
Aye.
Councilman Hedgecock, Councilman Schindler,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ramirez.
Okay, we move on to item number 2, awards, presentations, appointments, and proclamations. We have none tonight. Item number 3, citizens' comments. This section of the agenda allows members of the public to address the city council on any item within the jurisdiction of the council. Members of the public, when recognized by the mayor, should come forward to the lectern, identify themselves, and use the microphone. Comments are normally limited to 3 minutes in accordance with state open meeting laws. No action will be taken by the city council this evening, and all items will be referred to staff for a follow-up and a report. Citizens' comments submitted in writing to the city clerk by 5 p.m. on the day of the city council meeting shall be distributed to the city council and included in record. However, they will not be read. We have any comments? Council? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item. Public hearings, we have none. Consent calendar, we have none tonight. Item number 6, ordinance, presentation, discussion, potential action items. We have 2 items tonight. First one is 2021 water bond projects update. Sean.
Thank you, Mayor. And we'll probably just move into the second item because I'll probably introduce the team as we start talking about the water and wastewater solar projects as well. But the first part was just to kind of give an update to the council on the Series 2021 water bonds, but more else the project update to kind of let council know where we're at with those projects. Larry, you mind putting up the slides, please, too? So in 2021, the city issued bonds to basically blend in, or basically blend into the 2012 and refinance the 2012 bonds, and then introduce additional project money in 2021 for water projects. And so as part of the rate analysis prepared by Dan, we also included $8.5 million in project funds that were included in that total bond issue, including the remaining funds that were from the 2012 bonds. What I've provided on the, let's see if this works here. Oh, I don't know if it's working, Larry. Thank you. So I wanted to kind of just give an overview of where we're at with the projects. As part of the bond issuance, we did provide a project. There was a project list that was prepared by staff and presented to the council, as well as rough estimates on these project costs. And over time, project costs have actually increased quite substantially. And so we wanted to kind of go through some of the projects that we've been working on, some that have been complete, what's under design, and what's expected to be under construction. So some of the projects that have been completed are the filter valve actuators at the water plant, the Pleasant Street water line replacement project that was recently completed, and then we're actually subsequently in the process of doing the sewer line replacement in that same section of street, as the council recalls approving a few months ago, and then there'll be a complete repave of that section of Pleasant Street. And then also one of the big things that we did was the water treatment plant evaluation and topographic survey. What we found was that as we were starting to develop projects, we wanted to make sure we were being as efficient as possible in terms of determining project approach and what's really needed at the water plant. As we started seeing that costs were continuing to increase, and we really wanted to make sure we were addressing the issues at the water plant and within the transmission and distribution system, that we're being efficient as possible with the money to really address the needs. And so working with plant operations and other staff, really kind of looking at that. We hired a water and wastewater engineer to help with that full report to really prioritize some of the projects that were discussed. So that took quite a bit of time to undertake, really a lot of back and forth, developing project scopes for these different projects. And so what we have is a prioritization now of some of the projects that we're working on. We also have the Derrick Reservoir rehabilitation, which was the #1 priority project. This is a project that has been in the works for quite some time. When I was tasked with kind of taking over the day-to-day management of Public Works, this was a priority to get this project finished. And so we've been, since the issuance of the bonds, we've been working on scoping the project. We've done inspections at the tank, and we have a really good scope for this project. It's been taking a little bit longer just due to the fact that we have done everything we can to try and get and obtain funding for this project. We've worked with our lobbyists. We've worked on submitting DWR grants. And so we really wanted to make sure we were looking at all avenues to secure funding for this project, because the last thing I wanted and we had to wait for awards. So when we submit an application, it could be 6 to 8 months, if not longer, before we actually hear about when these projects are actually, whether they're funded or not. And so with the last round of DWR grants, our approaches with our electeds, we felt that it was necessary to proceed forward. And as council recalls, last year we requested that it be okay that we proceed. We delayed basically a year and undertake this project this fall. So we've re-engaged with our engineers, and they're currently working on finalizing the current cost estimates and getting this project pretty much ready to bid. The design work is relatively complete. It just needs to be fixed up a little bit, and then we'll be ready to hopefully get this thing out to bid this fall. Just based on the timing, it's a good time to do it. And then we also have the chlorine room safety improvements that we're expecting to go out to bid here probably in the next month or so. We're just working on a few nuances on the plans, and then we'll be able to get that out to bid. Gotta do both of these. Oh, thank you, Larry. We get that. Oh, there we go. So to continue on, we've also got the raw water intake screens. Those are the screens that are at the head of the plant that take out a lot of the grime and the extra debris that comes in from the canal. One of the screens has been down for several years, and we've been operating on one screen that intermittently has issues. And so we've been working on a project delivery for that. And so this project actually went out to bid yesterday. And so we're expecting to have construction start this late spring, summer. Due to lead times on material costs, this project will probably take about a year for full completion. So when we sign a contract, it'll be most likely be about a year. We also have SCADA Phase 1, which is substantially complete. There's just a couple little nuance punch list items that are being resolved, and we should see that project coming with a notice of completion here relatively soon, so we can close that complete project out. Also included is the TTHM project. That project is substantially complete, and the notice of completion for that should be relatively soon, within the next month. A couple other ones under design. We have the sodium hydroxide facility. This project is kind of dovetailed out of some concerns and treatment issues we've been having during the drought years in controlling pH. And so this is something we've kind of worked on from a pilot perspective and been in cooperation with the state in terms of looking at a different delivery method to control the pH level that comes into the distribution system. So this is a project that has a substantial price tag on it. We've actually recently sent out to our electeds, hopefully as a community benefit project or other types of, I guess you call them earmark projects, to try and secure funding for this project as well. But this is definitely a high priority project. And this has kind of been as of recent because of the degradation of the canal, the quality of the water coming into the canal. It's really kind of wreaks havoc on the plant. But the plant, the operators, Jared and the group and Anthony, they've done an awesome job about dealing with the conditions of the water that comes into that plant and putting out safe drinking water to the community. So I give them a lot of credit for what they're doing. We also have the Wastewater tank rehabilitation. That's the large stand pipe or tank that's out there at the water plant that we use for flushing our filters. And so that tank's 50 years old. We did a dive inspection on the tank. We have a recommendation. We had alternatives for replacement or whether we do a rehab on it. And so we are looking at a replacement on this particular tank. But as you can imagine, these costs have they've skyrocketed. And so all these projects we are working on getting shovel ready. So basically meaning that we want these projects designed, and then we're going to basically do whatever we can do to secure funding for these projects. Because if we have projects that are basically ready to go to construction. When we talk to our electeds, when we talk to grant writers, when you tell them you have construction ready projects that you can deliver and you can start delivering in 3 months, it gets on their radar. So we really want to set ourselves up for success. Basically, so what we want to do, I wanted to break down a little bit, is that we had total bond funds of $8.5 million. We secured, the council authorized $1.2 million in ARPA funds, which really kind of went towards the TTHM project. And then, so total expended to date is $2.7 million, and then we have about $7 million remaining. The project's expected to be completed with the remaining funds is, I put the TTHM, SCADA, the Pleasant Street, it's about $126,000. That's basically all the closeout costs, paying retention, the last of the costs, engineering, construction management fees. The Derrick Reservoir right now is at about $4.3 million. We're currently updating the costs with the engineers. The raw water intake screens are estimated at about $300,000. We'll know more once we get the bids back. The chlorine room estimated about $130,000. And then we also have other projects that we're looking at once we finalize scopes, what we would use for that remaining amount. And then, as we'll discuss later, is the $1 million contribution to the solar project to really help this project and bring down that principal balance on the solar. So just to go over these real quick, I've mentioned them before, but these are the projects with funding constraints. The sodium hydroxide facility, it's about $1.7 million for construction. The wash water tank, about $2.1. The wash water reclamation, filtration system, and sludge drying beds, those are currently scoping at. We're currently scoping that project, which then will give us a more detailed cost estimate, as well as the sedimentation, the flock basins and the sedimentation basins, which we're currently scoping as well. So in concluding, obviously the current funding is not adequate to finish all the projects on this list. Costs have drastically increased as projects are engineered and then further defined. Projects have been strategically prioritized, and currently, as I mentioned, we're engineering these projects to be shovel ready in order to pre-position ourselves for funding in the future. And then we're obviously active in searching for grant opportunities. We've applied for several grants, and then we're also utilizing our lobbying consultants. So with that, that's kind of an update on where we're at on the current projects. What I can do is I can answer and entertain any questions regarding those projects now, and then we'll kind of go into the water and wastewater solar project.
So I have some questions. So I thought I watched the entire previous water workshop pertaining to this data that we have right here that you're talking about. And I thought the amount was $7 million that we were going to get, and that we were going to refinance $7 million in other bonds. So I don't know where
There was carryover project money from the previous 2012 that was basically going to cover the cost of this to finish the SCADA project, which is about $1 million.
So that's my other question. So we were talking about SCADA back in 2020. So how far along are we in 4 years and 40% rate increases? Because that's how much we put towards was 40% in rate increases so far. So how far along are we on the, because it was told that back in 2020 that we needed SCADA, and that it said the TTHM was already designed and all we were ready to do was take that out to bid. So like, how far are we? What do we have to show for our 40%?
Both those projects are they're basically finished.
But the price has skyrocketed.
The projects came in relatively close to what the
I mean, right now you just, I'm
newer
not trying to-
projects. New projects are coming in a lot higher. Yes,
Right.
Based on what was estimated on the project list provided in the bond, and basically the project list during that time, yes, project costs have increased, and as we've relatively scoped out the project, I mean, we saw huge issues with lead times on products and delays. TTHM was we've signed the contract. Do you remember we signed that contract?
We signed the contract.
Almost a year and a half ago?
Yes, that is correct.
So what are the leading factors in delays for this stuff? Because this stuff just costs the city, and it costs the ratepayers. And at the time when I watched, Dan's presentation, he did a really good job at estimating all of these types of things, as he's done with previous ones that I've watched. And almost every single time we get told the same thing, that these projects take longer and that costs increase. And so then to me, it seems like, okay, well, after a 40% rate increase, now we're going to be talking somewhat again about more rate increases. And I look at this and I say to myself, after watching all this stuff, like how much of these projects are being actually finished? And like the Derrick project, this has been something that's been talked about for quite some time. So like, it's not like we haven't had ample time. So where is these slowdowns happening at? And what do we need to do to speed this up? It can't be that there's only 1 or 2 people in the whole nation that do these projects. So like, what do we got to do? Because to me, looking at like, hey, the TTHM project, it's been, it said it was ready, it was designed, it was ready to go. And that was one of the things that we used back in 2020 in order to tell people that, hey, we need these 40% increases, but hold on, these projects aren't finished. And people have already paid, and now we will be talking about more bonds. And when we're talking about the bond that we passed for this 2021, that included a substantial amount of previous debt that was put into that, plus $1 million for the WINS program, and then $750,000 that wasn't used from the previous bond that went to kind of refund it back, which I'm kind of not understanding. Like, we had money that we didn't use, so we paid interest on money that we didn't use, and then we refunded it back as a payment to try and get the lower bond payment down. All of this stuff just frustrating to me. It's very frustrating to understand that the taxpayers and the ratepayers are seeing massive increases. I mean, these are massive. 40% in 4 or 5 years is a lot. And so, and it may not be, and I'm not blaming anybody in this room. I mean, I listened to Dan's presentation. I thought it was spot on. I talk to you routinely about the things that are happening, but I am very frustrated, and I think the ratepayers are extremely frustrated as well. And so I'm wondering, like, when I hear that these projects are going to cost more money, and it's not just this time, it's every single time, we have to figure something out. Because when we're estimating costs and we're raising rates based on what we think we can get done, and then we're coming back and we're going to be asking for more rate increases, but yet these previous projects aren't done yet, it just makes me like not have any faith in the system at all. I'll be honest with you. I'm not faithful in this because we don't even have the previous stuff done. And we're already asking for more money, and the money's going to compound on money that we already have. And compound interest, if anybody knows, is a lot of money. And so when people say, hey, you're going to save money in the short run, I'm not an expert, but I'm going to have more questions tonight when we run, but I want to know how much money it's going to cost us more in the long run. How much money does it cost to keep refinancing your bond debt and adding bonds on top of, hey, and if we get a separate bond, how much does that more cost us? So I know that's not all based on what you just said. It was just for the projects, but that goes into, like, when I think about this, I think to myself, what do we have to show for this? Like the SCADA project, like I would have thought this would have been completely done by now. That's what I would have thought. I would have thought that the TTHM project would have been completely done. The other projects that you got added, I think the Pleasant Valley project, that's close to completion.
Pleasant Street's done.
It's done, which is an amazing thing. And I just want to tell you that all the people that work for the water department, I know that you guys do your best to get these things done. And I know that this isn't a lack of work on our part, but it's frustrating to me as a ratepayer and as a council member, when I look at this stuff, I'm like, what the heck? So I guess my question is, what can we do, or what do we need to do to speed these projects up so that we don't end up having to pay more money and then having to go back for more money to the ratepayers before the previous projects are even completed?
I can't really speak for anybody prior to my coming into public works and utilities. I know, just as you know, projects that have been in the works for a long time. I understand that. But But I can tell you, and I would imagine my staff would vouch for me, that we've been hitting the ground running since I've been able to have more control of the projects. And I think that I think turnover in some sense can slow things down. There's change in economics. There's a lot of factors that have come in, changing in scope of what needs to be done. I feel like our operators have really got a handle on how the plant operates, and it operates a little differently than it did when some of these projects were originally kind of envisioned. And so when working with staff, we're finding the best approach to address an issue. And some of them ended up being different than what was originally proposed. Some of it was supply chain issues. TTHM was delayed I could say years because of supply chain issues, because you couldn't find vendors to even give you quotes. And so that's one issue. SCADA, you ask these guys, it is a extremely complicated project. And we have an old plant with a lot of intricacies, and they discovered a lot just getting into the system. And they open a panel and you've got wires everywhere, and you have no idea where all those wires go because there's no plans for it. So there was a lot of work that's been put in, and I know you're not questioning that, but I think it takes time to get to do that. We had to do a lot of unnecessary work to get to where we're at because we didn't have the tools or the backup to be able to say, oh yeah, this is where this is at, this is where this is at, this is where this is at. So I think those are, some of the things that attributed to that slowed down. You know me, I like to move quick. I like to get things done as fast as possible. Sometimes I don't like how slow government works. But I think we've made a lot of progress in terms of really, analyzing the water plant took almost a year, because we looked at the ins and outs of the entire process of the plant, and based on the way it's currently being managed and operated, it did change some of the scope and and they're like, no, we can work with this. This is good, but we're having problems with this. So we moved some focus, and so that does cause a delay. But we want to make sure that we're doing the projects that are most meaningful based on who's running the plant, and what I trust these guys to provide that input, as well as working with our engineers that are really well versed in the operation. So
I know the engineers do a lot of work with a lot of different places and a lot of different things. Are we backed up at the engineering standpoint?
I don't think so, but they've got a lot of staff working on these projects. Okay. It's really just kind of scoping out and really understanding our plant, because there's a lot of new tried and true technology out there, but it's really expensive. So there's some things like the raw water intake screens. We're doing a retrofit into the existing cabinets of that equipment, and it's a lot cheaper than spending $1.2 million on all brand new stainless steel product that a lot of these vendors will sell to you. Mm-hmm. So we really had to do a lot of back and forth to really hone in on a good budget and a reasonable approach, knowing that we're trying to accomplish more than one project.
And so another question I have is, I know that I'm a huge fan of going after grant money, but has the wait in the grant money been beneficial, or have we actually lost out because of how much prices have went through the roof? I always look at that and say to myself, well, if we're sitting here waiting for something and prices are skyrocketing, hey, if we get $1 million, but that project now just went up $2 million, we actually lost out by waiting. And I know that that's a balancing game, and I know that it's hard to understand that, but I'm just wondering, in this situation, where Kalinga is really not the place that usually gets a lot of grants, just because of you would think because of our economic and demographics we would, but it seems like our politics keep us from getting some of these things. So curious, has it panned out for us, or has it been like, hey, maybe we need to speed up some of these and not wait for grants? Because I'm a huge fan of grants, and I think grants are a good thing, and anytime we can get them, it's a good idea, but
for sure.
Benefit?
That's why we're moving forward with Derek, because we've gone after DWR grants. We've had debriefs with DWR about the competitiveness of the grants. They want everything regarding water savings. Everything has to be water savings. Mm-hmm. And when you're trying to just keep safe, reliable drinking water being delivered to the community, there's not as much out there as there used to be. And we had some good leads with some of our electeds like Duarte and also with Caballero, but now the state's got no money. And so now we're trying to reduce how much we're asking just so we can offset some of the costs. So if we have a $1.7 million project, we'll ask for it, but then if they say, hey, well, we can only give you $1 million, we'll take it. It's a 50% discount on a project. So we're trying to find ways to leverage funds. And I think we've got some in place, but it's just with all the costs and with the amount of money we have, we've still got some additional money coming in after we get these projects, but I'm trying to do them strategically where I can't go out to bid on 3 projects all at once and then all of a sudden come in way too high and now I can't do all 3 projects. I've got to see what these projects are coming in at to find out where we land afterwards. Because I may say, oh yeah, with $300,000, then our low bid might be $800,000. So now I'm figuring out $500,000 somewhere else that I've got to come up with. So I'm trying to strategically do these projects where we can make sure that we're setting ourselves up for another project.
So that being said, it was stated back in 2020 that in the 4 years that we would have 400,000, per year, adding up to about 1.6, that could be used in excess cash that would go back to projects. Do we have any money that can go back into projects?
We do have a relatively healthy fund balance in talking with so there is that opportunity. But we were kind of just waiting for the dust to settle because of the drought. It kind of, it's like this ebb and flow sometimes with the drought because.
And that was stated that if the governor stepped in, Dan did make that statement that if the governor steps in and causes us to go back into drought, that kind of whacks things out.
Yeah, if I could just comment. Councilman, I can appreciate your concern about these projects we've been talking about for years and why haven't they gotten done? Well, Sean's alluded to COVID and inflation and everything else that happened and the drought. But the one comment I would make to you and to the public is there's a commitment now to finally rebuild the Derrick water tank this winter. That is going to be a huge and visible project. It was strategic to delay a year in the hopes of getting some grant money. So that water tank has served out its life until it's rebuilt. Hopefully next year at this time it'll be mostly done and you can say, okay, that's some real progress, along with the other projects that are getting done.
Yeah. I'm just curious because money's coming back in that we can use. I just wanted to know if that was the case because that was what the projection was. It was also stated, though, that if the drought came back and if we had increased water restrictions, which we absolutely did, that would throw things off. And this is coming from a comment from Mayor Ramsey that he stated back then. He said, Mayor Ramsey made the comment that, we're raising rates, but if the state cuts back our water, then we're going to have to raise rates again because people are not using the water, and then we can't pay for our bond. And then it was stated by Dan that, is very conservative in thinking about how much water that we can sell. And so, my thought on this is that the state has been increasingly aggressive, and because of what we have done as a city level, a lot of our water users are no longer using water on their front lawns. They've replaced their stuff, yada, yada, yada. So the 40% increase may not go as far as we thought it would because of the facts that people aren't using the water, because of how expensive it is, because people don't want to pay that much. And so I look at it as even though it's a monopoly, I look at it as a market system. And when you have the ability to have a certain amount of water, and then you have a price being set by the government here, but people refuse to pay that price, then you have a surplus. And when you have a surplus, that's not good for anybody. So in years that we're constricted from drought usage, we don't really have that surplus because there's nothing we can do. But in years that we're not constricted from that, there is a large surplus. And so in years that happens, when we raise rates, that actually hurts us. We actually go backwards because of that. Because now we have a surplus and people aren't willing to buy the water. Whereas if we took that water rate down and enticed people to actually utilize the water. And, my thing is, hey, if you had a product that was $50 and you sold it for $100, that'd be $50 that you'd make per item. If you sold 100, you'd make $5,000. However, if you take that same item and you sold it for 75 because you're trying to get more people to buy it, and 200 people buy that item, you'd make 15,000 in profit. And that's how I see that we're going right now, is that our water prices are so high, people are not wanting to use them. I hear this all the time. I'm not watering. I'm going to replace my entire lawn. Well, so then when we talk about bonds and we talk about projects, this is just counterproductive to the idea. Unless the state steps in and caps our production and says you can't have any more water, what we're doing with this surplus is just discarding it and saying it's not even there. And so I'm looking at these projects that were tried to get passed in the and looking at the amount of money we have. That's why I'm asking if we actually got the 1.6 that was put back into the system, because if not, and we didn't get it, because I remember Dan saying in that hey, our water balance was basically zero, that we didn't have any money back then in 2020, and that the 40% increase, the 16,888, was going to take us up to amount to where we would actually have some money. But it was stated that if the governor did put these controls back in, that we wouldn't have this money. And so I'm kind of looking at, okay, how much are these projects going to cost? They've went up. Now we've waited for grants for some of them, but I don't know if we've gotten any. And so the amount of money that we have compared to the projected amount that we've gotten, how much have we lost on that? What negative amount because obviously if we don't have the money to complete the projects that we thought we were going to with a 40% rate increase, that's concerning to me.
Well, Councilman, let me interject again. When I reset the rates, I'm getting into a little bit of what I'm going to talk about. When I reset the rates in 2020, I did it conservatively. So the city did find both water and wastewater over the 5-year planning period. And Maya was just checking, there is at least a few million dollars in fund balance now in water. And what I want to say about that is we're about to have the fiscal 23 audit, and I will be doing the disclosure reporting for the bonds, and those will be the solid numbers. So you should really, Maya, when that's done, we should bring that back to City Council and present to them water and wastewater status based on the 23 bonds to show that we're in good shape. So we are. It worked. I feel good about that because of what's happened since 2020. So it's a good thing. We're in a good place.
I hear you say this, but I hear every day people tell me that we're in a horrible place. Our consumers, the ones who are paying the bill, are livid. They are so mad. Every single day I get told that I'm the one who rates the rates. I said, oh no, I haven't voted on any increases since I've been on council. I said, you talk to the other guy. He was the one who said to do these rate increases. 95% natural gas, 40% on water, 30-something percent, I think 35% or whatnot on sewer. Those increases to somebody that is on Social Security, for someone who has a minimum wage job, for someone who has to, that does not spell out something that's good. I'm sorry.
Well, you're making
in your mind, it may be because of what you're talking about. But to the consumer, it is not a good thing. It is a horrible tragedy. And for those like me that, we make some decent money, guess what? We aren't able to spend as much of our money in the economy because now we're having to pay for those types of things.
Well, you're exactly right. My perspective is from the operations of the city, and you're thinking about it from the ratepayer. You are correct.
And I just want to say that I listened to the previous, and you were spot on almost all the stuff that you said, and I really took good notes, and so I was able to understand what you're saying, which is why I'm able to speak today on the stuff that I'm talking about and asking questions, and the questions I don't know the answers to. And so I'm not blaming anybody here. I think everyone here has done a great job to try and do the best for their city as humanly possible. But somebody has to stick up for the ratepayers and say, what the heck are we getting for this? And what's the future look like in a time where the governor and the water groups are wanting to set us back to 44 gallons or 42 gallons or whatever they can? And I've been at the forefront of this. I've been on I'm in a working water group. I'm on Facebook. I go to the state. I talk to them, and I try and tell them, hey, Kalinga's different. We can't afford these things. And you know what? I'm outnumbered by a long shot because there's less small cities than there are big cities that send representation. and the big cities, they're all in favor of this, and I don't get it. I'm just completely amazed that, hey, they got tertiary pipes. There doesn't affect them from what I hear from them. But for us, it does. And so I just want to say that was my little speech / rant for this little thing for the project list, and we can move on. But from my perspective, I don't know if anybody else has any to say anything, but I wanted to close with saying that I appreciate everyone's hard work in this. And I know that Sean just took over not too long ago. I know that the two guys sitting over there have done a great job at the water, and that their number one goal is to provide safe and clean drinking water. And I appreciate mine and Dan and everyone that's involved in this.
Okay, to what Dan just said, he's thinking as a citizen, not a council member. We have to do that. We have to think both as a citizen and a council member, because we're the ones having to flip the bill, just like everybody else, and it hurts us just as bad. Now, the next question is, on the tank reservoir up there, when we originally talked about it a couple years ago, it was what, $2.5 million?
No, it hasn't gone up much since then. Maybe 3.5, 4.
It's it.
This
It's roughly about
4.3
4.
estimate is probably based on, I think it was still based on what was previous.
That's to cover till winter time, correct? Or till the fall when it starts?
We don't have the current cost estimates. So our engineers are actually working with the tank companies right now, and the coating companies, because there's big components to the project. So like the roof and the coating is probably the two largest components of the project. And so you can get pretty good costs from those companies, because there's a handful of those coating companies and companies that are going to build that roof.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also looking at two different options on a roof, whether it's a steel roof or whether you do that aluminum dome roof, to see what's more cost effective for the city as well. So they're going through that, and then we'll have some better updates on that once we get a little bit closer.
Well, the quickest and cheapest is obviously going to be the steel one, but in the long run, the aluminum one is actually going to hold up a heck of a lot longer.
You'd be surprised. They were pretty close in price last time they compared them. So with the aluminum almost being cheaper depending on how tall the dome is.
So it shouldn't go above the 4.3?
I can't guarantee that at this point. I
Yeah,
hope
because
not.
just the number wise, from back when it was 2.5 million to now, it's a 72% increase.
Yeah, no, I mean, when we estimated it during the bonds, I mean, we didn't have a detailed engineer's cost estimate and scope at that point. So it was very difficult to estimate exactly how much it was going to cost when we do these projects. We didn't expect project costs to go up that much, but as we developed the scopes on, some of them gone down a little bit, some of them gone up. I mean, it's unfortunate. I was caught in on the tail end of the development of the project list, and so there was a lot of meetings with staff and our engineers to try to determine kind of what that cost might be. But a project of this scale requires quite a bit of effort to really get a detailed estimate. Obviously, you could do it again. We have pretty good solid numbers now in terms of every single project. But whether or not we would have approved a $20 million bond, that may have been another question at another time. But we're going to work with what we've got, and I think that we can get at least to the point with the money we've got. We can get somewhere. But I mean,
Now,
eventually there's going to be
You're going to be bringing us all the bids so we can actually go through them with the actual cost of the materials?
Yeah,
on
you
both
guys
sides?
award every bid.
Because that's
so-
something I know that me and Roger for sure can, and possibly Lonnie have done most of our lives.
All bid
is
awards
that
come to
type
the council.
of- Okay.
Yep.
Any more questions?
All right.
Anybody have any for us?
So what I can do is I'm going to introduce the team.
Okay.
And then we can do kind of some intro on the water and wastewater solar projects. So I've got Brian right here next to me. He's with Johnson Controls, who's representing the construction of the solar project. Dan Bergman, who you all know, with IGS. And then we have Bud on Zoom, Bud Levine from Wolf Hansen. And then we've also got Rob Pankratz with Wolf Hansen, who is right next to Dan. And then we also have Nikki with Oppenheimer, who Bud can introduce in a little bit, who will be in listening.
Can we get a description of what everyone does? I know you said where they're from, but what everyone does. That
Sure.
way I understand.
So Dan is supporting, in terms of this project, Dan's supporting us on the economics and the cash flow of the project. Bud and Rob are basically providing the bond financing for this project. And then Brian is basically the contractor, basically who we're going to be purchasing the project from, essentially, under the design build. Do you want me to have to introduce everything, or any more?
That'd be nice. I mean, that way I can kind of get an idea of what everyone does.
Sure.
And
Brian,
if-
did you want to?
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Brian Labrie. I work with Johnson Controls. Johnson Controls, we're a design-build general contractor that's been in business for about 137 years. We invented the first electric thermostat, but do a lot with energy efficiency, solar, things of that nature. My main role is to basically be the main point of contact for you all to Johnson Controls and from Johnson Controls to you all.
Good evening, Council. My name is Rob Pankratz, and I work with Wolf Hansen and Company. We are a municipal advisor, and we have been working with the city since the early 2000s. My colleague, who's here on Zoom, Bud Levine, has been working with the city for many years. I've been working on the city's account for our company on a support basis since 2018. I assisted in the successor agency refunding transaction. I assisted with the 2021 water sewer project, and I also assisted with the fire truck lease that took place in 2021. Our company is Wolf Hansen. We're based in San Rafael, California, and as municipal advisors, we have a fiduciary obligation to the city and all of our clients when working on municipal securities and other financing activities.
So, Dan Bergman, you know me well. My role in this project has been to carefully scrutinize the economics of the project itself, which I'll talk about in my presentation, and then talk about how it impacts Coalinga's water and sewer rates. And with that, I'll go to you, Bud, and then Nikki.
Yeah, happy to. Bud Levine. I've been the municipal advisor for the city since I think around 2004, and I participated in helping to structure, and in some cases we acted as an underwriter where we sold just about all of the bond financing that has been done since 2004. I also participated in 2015 the RFP process where you selected a ESCO, the power company, management company, Johnson Controls, after a competitive process involving several other ESCOs, and that was back in 2000, I believe it was 2015, and there have been many reasons why the solar project has been delayed over the years, and now it's ready to hopefully move forward. I'd like to introduce also Nikki Tallman. Originally, Brandis Tallman had worked on several of the bond projects. Brandis Tallman has been acquired by Oppenheimer and Company, and Nikki, I believe, is the West Coast manager of municipal operations for Oppenheimer. I'll introduce her to talk herself about it.
Thank you, Bud. I'm Nikki Tallman. I apologize for being in the car. I was in Coalinga earlier today and I had to come to Fresno. I'm happy to be able to listen in and introduce myself tonight. As Bud said, we are the underwriting firm. Our responsibility is to market, price, and sell the bonds. And we've worked with Coalinga on the water wastewater project, as well as the equipment leasing project.
Thank you so much for the introductions.
All right, so I'm going to do a brief overview, and then I'll hand it over to Brian to kind of give more details on the project. So we've been working with Johnson Controls actually for quite some time on these projects, and we've done some meticulous review of these projects. We started back in about 2022 on this particular project, and we basically submitted a application to PG&E under the NEM2 tariff program. If you have any questions on that, I know that Brian can definitely explain that. But as we know, we're now in NEM3, which has kind of decimated solar in California. And so we are currently under the old tariff, which is really making this project look attractive. Where in previous years, these projects have not looked attractive based on their locations. So we've got two locations. We've got one at the water treatment plant, which the council's familiar with the property adjacent to the water plant. And then at the wastewater plant, we're actually doing a smaller facility there, which will be on the wastewater facility property. So we don't have to worry about leasing or buying any property for that particular project. Basically, the goal is to generate our own power for less money than what we pay PG&E. We'll have some discussion about savings versus avoided costs and how that functions within the overall enterprise fund and how it impacts the enterprise fund. But really, a lot of things. I mean, there's been some delays in this project. I mean, and I know we talked about delays earlier, and it just seems like there's always delays. But really, was part of the acquisition of this property for the water treatment plant. Basically, the negotiations are complete. I think my slide may have said that I don't think it's up right now. But it's on 7 acres. It's going to be under a long-term lease. And basically those costs for that lease are included in the modeling. So at this time, the project's got momentum, and the purpose of this workshop really is to provide an update on the details of the project for you guys. But some important takeaways from this meeting that we are basically looking for is rates will eventually need to be increased to cover operating costs, not because of this solar project. And that's really, and we'll go into a little bit more detail as terms of why that discussion is occurring at this time and not at a later date. There's also this incentive tax credit that comes from the federal government that could roughly bring in between $2.1 to $2.7 million to the water fund and $800,000 to the sewer fund. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Also, that the financing will require a contribution of about $1 million from those Series 2021 bond proceeds. The economics for this project are modeled over a 25-year period, with the majority of the savings that you'll see that a lot of them it'll occur towards the latter part of the years based on the financing. And really, the big thing is this is a long-term commitment for the city's water and wastewater infrastructure. That's like kind of what we want to convey to the council, is that this isn't a short-term fix. This is something to kind of put the tourniquet on and stop the potential bleeding and avoid high increasing costs in the future. And so we want to really look at this as a long-term project, a long-term commitment, rather than looking at what the short-term results are of the project. And so next steps in this project, there is one, we're still looking, we got to get a county approvals because this property is in the county. And essentially, from what our conversation with the county is, we just need to obtain building permits from the county. There's no other land use permitting required. We've gone round and round with the county and have a commitment from them that basically all we'll need is to pull building permits for this particular project. We also need to complete the Williamson Act cancellation because it says existing grazing land or farmland that this property is currently on. We'll need to execute the land lease, which negotiations, as I mentioned, is complete. Get bond financing ready to proceed. We'll need to execute a formal contract with Johnson Controls, which will include the steps and notice to proceed as we move through this project. We'll have to file for the ITC funding on the completion of the project. And then one of the other things is we will, based on, and we'll talk more about the actual rates, but basically direction to begin the process of issuing a 218 notice for rate increases that would essentially be going into effect next year, that we would be talking to you basically in the spring, but this project is triggering that discussion. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brian to kind of give you an overview and more detail of the project scope of the solar.
I just had a quick question.
Sure.
When you're talking about the Williamson Act cancellation, is there a fee with that, and who pays that?
We'll end up covering. We'll pay the cost of that.
So the city's gonna pay for that fee?
Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of times, some of this will be built into if there's things that can be built into the financing, they can. But as of right now, we're not anticipating any like large costs that can't be absorbed during operations if there are. If not, a lot of it's under the contract of JCI, and we fold that into the financing. So Brian, it's all you. Oh, you need a mic.
And then, is that thing live, or am I going to Larry?
Oh yeah, Larry, does this work? You know?
Let's see.
Oh, there you go. It works. Okay. Right, bud.
Thank you, members of council. So I'm going to start by going through an agenda. Today I'm going to be covering the project layouts, both sides, both at the water and the wastewater treatment plants. I'm going to be going through some of the general system components that go into building these projects. Be looking at the performance guarantee and what we call measurement and verification, because as a part of this project, Johnson Controls is providing a guarantee of the project performance, which works as a risk transfer model, or basically mitigating the risk financially of the project's long-term performance. Also be going through a summary of the project's financials and a quick summary of the project benefits prior to closing out. Start by looking at the water treatment plant. So you can see bottom right corner, the current water treatment plant. We'll be looking at, as Sean said, a 7-acre parcel right at the left border of the treatment plant. The system size of this is it's just under 1 megawatt in total. You can see, where's the little laser on this guy? Sweet. You can see the total kilowatt hour baseline usage of the plant, basically how much energy the water treatment plant uses in a year in kilowatt hours is 3,320,000. That baseline period is from 21 to 22. The estimated PV production during the first performance year is 2.8 million kilowatt hours, and that's about 85% of the system or the plant's total usage. The reason why that's not higher is because once you get over 1 megawatt, then there are additional requirements that PG&E can put on you related to upgrades that are required to the electric grid outside of the actual arrays themselves. So that's the reason why we are just right under 1 megawatt and why we aren't above why we aren't closer to 100%.
No. Right in the middle.
So looking at the wastewater treatment plant, you can see where the array is located relative to the existing treatment plant. The total baseline energy usage of the wastewater treatment plant from the 21 to 22 year is 917,000 kilowatt hours, and the estimated production in year one is 889,000 kilowatt hours. So that's a 97% PV penetration. So that's much higher, as obviously because we don't have the constraint of the 1 megawatt size from PG&E. So going into some of the components of the system, obviously you have the solar panels. You also have the inverters. You'll have a tracking system. It's called the single axis tracking, so that way the panels will rotate throughout the day to maximize the amount of sun exposure that they have. Also a part of this project is going to be an automatic module washing system. So rather than having to have periodic panel cleanings throughout the year, there's actually going to be a system that will spray the panels down with a cleaning solution regularly. So that way you don't have to wait months at a time in between panel cleanings, especially in agricultural areas with high dust load. You'll end up with large accumulations of panel soiling, which ultimately reduces your the amount of generation that you have. So that's something that can reduce your cost long term of panel cleaning, but also significantly improve your savings. The electrical work associated with interconnecting the solar arrays into your existing electrical system, the monitoring systems that look at the system's overall performance, and some site work associated with each location. To give you an idea of some of the site work, obviously both sites are not perfectly ready for construction, so we're looking at doing soil testing. Looking at the water treatment plant, there's been soil testing. We'll have to do some grubbing, fencing out the property, stripping any organic material, and then grading. The wastewater treatment plant, there's going to be grading. There's soil testing, fencing. Going to be filling the basin, relocating sludge piles, and then cutting the bottom of the basin as well. Just doing some general site work and getting that location prepped and ready for construction.
Hold on a second before you go any further. I got a question on that. On the wastewater plant, when you take up that space right there, where are they going to put that secondary basin and all the sludge? Because there's not enough room out there for that. They'd have to extend the plant.
That is, that's already been filled in already. It's all that area right there is all leveled out now and compacted. So it's,
Right, but when it comes time to drain and clean one of the other ponds, where are you going to put the sediment at?
that has not been determined yet for the new site for that yet. We just thought that was probably the best area to put the solar at this time.
Yeah, it's up the highest, for sure.
And then I have a question on the previous slide. Back one more. Okay, so when we're looking, back one more. Okay, so when you're looking at annual kilowattage usage and then the production, and you're saying there's a megawatt limitation to PG&E, so like, how many? I mean, Am I reading this correctly? 3,320,680 kilowatt usage.
Yes, that's kilowatt hours.
Kilowatt hours, and so that's over a megawatt, correct? 'Cause if
That's
you do
over a
the
megawatt hour. So it's two different measurements. It's
Okay.
Yeah, kilowatt hours is the amount of like actual energy over time
Okay,
versus kilowatt is going to be the nameplate capacity of the actual array.
okay, and so what's the capacity of the actual array?
It's like 999,000 kilowatts.
999,000 kilowatts,
So
and that's why it's not.
or sorry,
able-
999 kilowatts. So it's
Okay.
just under.
And when you're looking at your PV penetration rate, do these panels have the standard 1% per year degradation? So in 20 years, it's going to go down 20%?
Yes, they do have standard degradation.
So would that put in 20 years our penetration level at 64% instead of 84%?
I don't have the exact number on the top of my head, but I do have a spreadsheet that shows the total kilowatt hour
Because
degradation
it would
over
take
time.
it down dramatically over 20 years, and if we're looking at a 25-year plan, we should think about that, especially if you're thinking about savings and how much savings that we would gain, because if the penetration rate isn't this, it obviously is not going to be the same for the whole 25 years. Have we taken that into consideration on what our savings is going to be?
Well, I want to comment on this one. This is something that Brian and I have talked about. The 3.3 million kilowatt hours is correct. That was 21, 22. But when we look at 22, 23, we're actually down close to 2.8, 2.9 million kilowatt hours. So based on the last 12 months, the system is already at 100%. You would never want to size the system higher than your present load because those panels are expensive. We need to fully utilize the panels. The flip side of the question is the concern that we would have too much power. And as we've talked about this internally, as I've talked about this with your staff, it's unimaginable that the water demand in the near future could drop more than it's already dropped, with people having conserved as much as they did during the extreme drought. So from my perspective, I'm comfortable with 2.8, 2.9 million. The point is, we're at 100% right now.
Yeah, no, that's not my question. My question is that we're going to lose 20% penetration over the 20 years. And that's from almost every solar company that is out there. I know, and I actually disagree with you. I would much rather go over. On my panels in my house, I went absolutely over because everyone who didn't go over was stuck purchasing more panels later. This is a fact. And so I understand PG&E won't give you credit on anything over like 100, and I think it's 110% of your current usage. But at my house, when I got my panels up there, I got like 28, 29 panels. And the very next year, the lady says, oh, well, you used more than that. And I said, how? I've been conserving and I have solar. I said, how is that? And so there wasn't a good answer that she could give me. But what I did listen to begin with was the fact that these panels do Certain panels have different rates, and so that's why I'm asking, is this 1% per year? And if so, over 20 years and over 25 years, you're gonna lose 25% efficiency of these panels. And if we're taking conservative numbers and saying to ourselves that we're going to have savings after year 5 or year 8, and then all the way up to year 25, and we're adding up those numbers, we also have to include in those numbers that we're going to lose a percentage of that, of the, what you call PV penetration. And so that's what I want to make sure that we have included into these numbers of looking at savings, because that makes a difference.
And so I believe off the top of my head that it's actually 0.5% per year after the first year. But I will double check on these panels.
It's a 0.5%.
It's a 0.5%.
0.5%. And how much
but-
do you guys guarantee on power production?
We have the guarantee that's in the cash flow. We're guaranteeing the amount of cost that's in the cash flow. So all the savings that's modeled is guaranteed by Johnson Controls.
Okay, thanks.
But to answer your question though, is that degradation modeled in the savings? It's 100% modeled in the savings.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I got a question for 2 slides forward from this one right here. Who maintains the cleaning solution to clean these panels? The city? And what does that cost? Or is it you guys?
So we have a service agreement that's proposed for Johnson Controls to do ongoing maintenance of systems with both the panel systems and the module washing system.
Okay, so that'll be coming to us pretty soon then.
Yes, you'll see it in one of the spreadsheets, probably the one that.
It's in Dan's, because mine's a summary.
Probably one that Dan has, or Rob does, but it'll kind of break down, it's a good spreadsheet to show. It actually shows the 1%, a 0.5%, plus it shows the savings, the generation, the savings from just the rate change, the cash flow, and it kind of goes across. So you'll see.
But our savings are guaranteed by Johnson Controls. So
The savings
that's
are
where-
guaranteed, as
that's
long
where
as
we're
we.
saved at.
Yes, as long as we want to continue that guarantee each year, we can require that guarantee as long as we want for the full 25 years. We can do it for 5 years, we can do it for 2, whatever we want.
Does it cost more money depending on how long we want that guarantee?
Yes,
And is it a lot more money?
and you'll see it. I can't remember exactly what that is, but there's a cost associated with it, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the rough savings on the citizens in time? Are we gonna be able to drop the rates down some?
We'll keep going through the presentation and we'll be able to kind of break that all down for you.
Now I got 2. Okay, so let's get back to. Okay, so onto this guy now. Well, we just started getting into this conversation right now. Okay, so talking about the performance guarantee. So Johnson Controls, part of the reason I mentioned our size is you're going to be looking at Johnson Controls to financially guarantee the performance of your project. So Johnson Controls has about $1.3 billion in performance guarantees across our portfolio nationally, internationally. Annually, we write not annually, but we write about 0.3% or less in shortfall payments. So we do a good job on being on the money, not trying to be too aggressive, but not too conservative as well when monetizing, which is part of the reason, part of the work that we've done with Dan. But if there is a shortfall, we realize that, we accept that, and we write checks because we want to make sure, you're looking at long-term financial obligations. So we want to make sure that you're whole, that you're able to make those debt service payments, but also realize the benefits that are being presented to you and that you're agreeing to. And so if that shortfall ever occurs, there's a couple of different ways that we go about this. First is that we would look to remedy the root cause of the shortfall, so that way it doesn't continue. We look to offset the amount of the shortfall with any unpaid balance that you'd owe to us, because like one of the things that was mentioned is an ongoing service agreement for maintenance, or if there was other sorts of cleaning or other items, we could take that out of that remaining balance. We would look to potentially, which obviously subject to an agreement, look to provide any additional services to the value of what that shortfall is, or pay you all for the shortfall amount. Obviously, like, this is all a conversation, and it has to be mutually agreed upon. So if you came to us and there was a shortfall and you'd say, we just want our money, then we would pay you the money that's owed. Going over some performance period activities and responsibilities. Like was mentioned, there's going to be a service agreement that we're proposing for preventative maintenance, ongoing maintenance of all of the systems that we're going to be implementing. There's what's called measurement and verification. Our abbreviation is M&V. M&V is it's tied to the performance guarantee. So that's what we do, the work that's performed to evaluate system performance and ensure that the systems are operating optimally, and to back check against our guarantee to make sure that the systems are working in the way that we designed them and that they are working to the level of your guarantee. And then we meet with you all on an annual basis and present a performance report of how everything has been working. During that M&V period, some of those reporting responsibilities are analyzing the solar PV system performance, performing utility bill monitoring, remote monitoring through metering equipment of the assets that are being built, that annual performance report, and then visual inspections of the systems, making sure that nothing went haywire or animals got into some of the systems, and then reviewing the O&M to ensure that everything's operating well long term.
So I have a question.
Yep.
So your initial term is for 5 years. Mm-hmm. So that means basically, let's say that we're planning on 25 years for this service, for this items, and let's say in 5 years that you guys look at this, we look at this, and you guys said to yourselves, wow, we had to pay them out. And so in order to continue this payout program, we're going to have to raise the rates on how much we're going to decide that you're going to have to pay us in the next 5 years to continue this. Have we looked into that?
So the 5 year, I knew that question was coming because it said 5 years on there, and we're talking about 25 years. This is something that we've talked internally as staff, and looking at the type of project and whether or not 5 years would be a reasonable time to continue the full M&V to ensure the guarantee. This is something that the council can consider. If you guys want to look at a guarantee for the full life of the project, that's totally up to you. Staff felt that based on, when we look at those costs for the M&V and for the other performance measures, that whether or not it's worth that guarantee, because based on year 5, we should know whether or not this system is going to operate the way it's supposed to operate, other than warranty type items happening, right? And so if that's something that the council would rather look at and rather look at the guarantee being the full 25 years, we can do that. And I think the guarantee can go away anytime, right?
Yep.
So we have the choice. So if we see after 7 years it's working great, we're tired of paying the 7V, it's working fine, we don't even remember it's even out there anymore, then we could at one time say we don't want to pay the guarantee anymore.
Mm-hmm. So the M&V is kind of like a warranty?
It's not. It's more of like a simple way to look at it is it's like an insurance policy. There is a separate and very specific warranty for all the items, but you can think of it as an insurance policy. But if your concern is, if I was kind of reading into what you were saying, is that if we were paying out a guarantee, or if we were paying out a shortfall and our guarantee was for 5 years and you wanted to extend that guarantee, the concern is that, well, if we were going to say in year 6, we have to write out $100,000 each year, so we're going to bump up the cost of our M&B by $100,000. Is that what your concern was?
Well, my concern is that insurance companies aren't in business to lose money. Everybody knows that. You guys wouldn't insure a product that you're going to lose on. That wouldn't be good on your side. So, what is that number? I think that just knowing what the number is and what it is moving forward and how much is your aggregate move up compared to like what happens, obviously you guys probably have your numbers already set because you've been doing this for a while with other companies. So what happens when you have to pay out? How much does that, on my car insurance, if I were to get into an accident, in 2 or 3 years when they renew my car, or 1 year when they renew my car insurance, guess what? It goes up. because I had an accident, regardless of whether it's my fault. If they have to pay, it goes up usually. So, and some companies say, oh, well, no, we don't do that, you know, but then they do it 2 years down from now. So I'm just looking at like, hey, what can we look at? Like, what are we?
Yeah, so we don't have we don't increase the cost for M&V if we have a shortfall. That's a cost of doing business for us. We actually have a specific it's like a specific fund inside of our company's structure in the event that there are shortfalls, so it doesn't come out of like it's
So you pretty
complicated
much hedge
accounting.
that ahead of time then. The 0.3% that you guys are getting, which isn't very much, you're making enough money off of those M&Vs that you can cover the costs of the other folks. I mean, it would have to. You wouldn't be going negative. It would have to. I'm just asking. It doesn't matter to me on whether or not we would move forward with this. I'm just wanting to understand it.
I mean, essentially, yes, as the way that we work as an entire corporation, but it's the same thing. It's the same way as if we estimate a construction project and then we end up missing something, and so we end up exceeding our cost and we end up having a negative margin job. It's the same type of concept there. That job ends up losing us money, and we make enough money over the rest of our entire corporation's operation that we don't end up going out of business for having a negative margin project.
And are you insuring this with somebody else? Is that how this works? No,
Nope.
this is internal?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And then on just to add on, so Sean had said like you can determine the term of the M&V. So if you were saying like, you know what, like right now it's set at 5 years. If you wanted to start off with a 10, 15, 20 year measurement and verification contract, we could do that. And you would have the prices for our M&V services contracted with us for that term. And then at any point in time during that term, if you said, you know what, we're confident that the system is performing and we don't need the guarantee anymore, you can cancel it at any point in time. You're welcome.
There's no extra cost to cancel? Let's
No.
say in 10 years, we want to cancel that. There's no extra cost, even if we have it set contracted for 25?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. We don't have the ability to go back and like raise your M&V costs during that time. But if at any point in time you wanted to cancel, you have to give us enough notice prior to I forget the exact amount of time. I think it's 30 or 60 days prior to the date that the contract would renew. Just let us know ahead of time, and then we cancel it, and that's the end of the measurement verification.
So would the M&V be included into a potential bond? This cash flow that pays for that.
It's cash flow. So it's a cost that's paid to us annually for those services.
Okay.
Kind of like a service agreement.
Well, I'm just asking because if we financed it out and then got a refund, we would have already paid interest on money that would be getting backwards.
The way that it's presented is that it's coming out of the gross savings annually. So you look at the total savings that's minus, and then you subtract the M&V costs as well as the any of the O&M costs, and that gives you the net savings of like the net.
Are you going to explain that further in the
Yeah.
slide? I'll
Yeah,
wait
you'll
for
see
that.
there's going to be a cash flow slide that
Okay.
includes
All right.
measurement verification, operations, where the different savings come from, and then how it all relates to the debt service payments.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course. Okay, so I'm going to be going through, this is just a summary of the savings for the water treatment plant. We mentioned the table. The table is going to be presented in detail by Dan and by Rob. For the water treatment plant, the construction cost for this site is $8,267,000. That's generating about 2.8 megawatt hours per year in energy. The savings or the annual avoided cost in year one is a total of $626,000. Now, out of that, $439,000 is coming from the offsetted energy from solar, and then $186,000 is also coming from a change in the rate structure for the water treatment plant. When we look at modeling that out long-term, we are utilizing a 5% escalating factor. So that's assuming a 5% increase to annual utility costs from PG&E, because you're looking at trying to project out what the value of that savings is, looking at long-term. So if the PG&E costs over time escalate at a rate that's higher than 5%, then the value of your solar it's worth more. Now there's a flip side to that, which if it's less, then it's the value is worth less. But there's a reason why we go and look at 5% is we take a long-term historical analysis at PG&E rates to come up with what we believe is a conservative model that's used across the industry.
And when you're talking about 186,000 from the rate change, you're talking about from PG&E's rate change that we would get by moving to solar, correct? Okay.
Yeah, we're choosing a rate structure that is optimized for your treatment plant that ends up generating savings over the existing rate tariff that you're on right now. So then the year one expense total is $80,000. So that's those expenses come from the M&V, from O&M. For this site, it's also included there is the lease expense for the land. And so looking at the 25-year net avoided cost or the net positive cash flow, that's $8.8 million. So that's the total cost of the project plus all the costs that are associated with it, any of the service agreements, any other maintenance cost, and finance cost. So
That, and sorry to interrupt, but I don't think we have the version 2.5. So that doesn't include the financing. So we updated the slide to include the financing. So that's basically your 25-year avoided costs if you paid cash for it, right? So in this case, it's updated to 8.8 million.
Okay, so it's 8.8 million if with including the financing, that's the estimate.
Yeah.
And how much, Sean, how much per year do we pay for PG&E?
We'll be able to give it to you. We're looking at a budget of $1.2 million this coming fiscal year
For that area out there?
for the water
specifically?
treatment plant. Yes. Yeah. And I think the numbers in this particular presentation show something around 900,000, I think somewhere around that in the first year.
What's an ITC value? What does ITC stand for?
that's the investment tax credit.
Okay.
So that's go ahead, John.
That's basically the rebate program that private entities used to always get for doing solar. Now, as part of the IIJ, which is
IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act.
the Inflation Reduction Act, it's been extended to public entities as as basically a rebate program. And what's the percentage on that? It was 20.
It's about like 25 to 27%. There's a few things that go into whether or not you can get specific multipliers based upon like when you're actually applying for it.
And what does the expenses total 80,795 stand for?
So that is your. You'll also see it in detail when you look at the spreadsheet. But that's your measurement and verification cost plus the maintenance, the O&M cost, plus any of the subscriptions for software and the lease cost for the land.
Lease? Oh, is that
Yeah, the lease for the property.
lease for the property?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And so is this per year?
Yes.
And we'll have that. We should have, I think, I don't know which one has the spreadsheet, but we'll have a breakdown of all of this kind of in a line and goes across each year by year to kind of see what that cash flow looks like. So you guys get a picture, and then Dan's got some.
Yeah, I just gave the workbook to Larry, so when it's on the screen, hopefully we can see it, because there's so many numbers on that spreadsheet.
Yeah.
It might almost be good to print it out.
I'm sorry, print
It might almost be good to print it out because
Okay,
it is a lot, but
We'll come back to that if we need.
yeah. Okay, and then the investment tax credit, that, as Sean said, is a rebate that becomes available. It's post-construction. It comes in around year 2, and the value of that is 2 to 2.7 million. And the reason why it's a range is because There's certain multipliers that are available, but they're first come, first serve. And so depending on when the project is built, and when it's applied for and what money is still available in those different pots is the reason for the range.
And do those, does that 85,000 or whatever, the 80,000, is that a fixed cost over the periods, or can that change?
It's escalated escalated for inflation over time, but it's
How much is the escalation?
I believe it's 3% per year.
So that means it goes up 3% per
Correct.
year.
And that is also modeled in the cumulative cash flow model.
So when I present, I'm going to focus on that part, and Rob and Bud will back me up on that part, the fully integrated model.
Were there any other questions on water before I move into wastewater?
You got any more questions?
No, I'm just calculating up the numbers. So it looks like without a 3% escalation per year, it's sitting at the 25 years about $2 million. But if you add the 3%, I'm guessing it compounds every single time. Mm-hmm. So it's going to compound every single year. So what's that number over 25 years? Does somebody have that?
Well, it is totaled in the spreadsheet that they're going to present, but trying to get the total for 25 years just off that number would be inaccurate, because right now it's only modeled that the measurement and verification is going to be for 5 years. So as of year 6, that ends up cutting out. And then there also is some other maintenance that's going to be required right now. Project, actually no, I'm misspeaking. I was thinking of maintenance that was tied to the, we originally had batteries in this, and the batteries had prepaid maintenance for a certain period of time, and then it came in, so that's no longer the case. So yeah, it's after year 5, that M&V cost is no longer modeled in the cash flow, but you'll be able to see in the spreadsheet that Dan presents the total amount that's paid for all of those services and maintenance costs.
Well, the reason I'm saying is because if we decided to do it over the whole 20 years, that takes at least $2 million off of the amount of money we're going to save.
And that total is reflected in the.
But it's only for 5 years. You didn't reflect it over the 25 years. So if you add just 20 years times that 80,000 is $2 million. And that's not including the 3% escalation. So it's a lot more than that, because it stacks every single year.
Councilman, I appreciate what you're asking, because my concern with the performance of the panels is not in the early years, but in the latter years. So, Brian, a good question for JCI is, how much would that cost if we took a warranty all the way to the end? I'm guessing it would be prohibitively expensive, but again, the risk is at the latter end of the projects as the panels start to age. The technology is proven. It's the latter years. I don't know if you can do that, Brian.
I mean, is the question that if you had a warranty for the entire period, or the question is if you had a financial guarantee for the entire period?
Well, financial guarantee is what matters. That those economics that we are looking at for the projects would hold true for 25 years.
Just a question. I was just curious. It can be, I mean, we have a little bit of time, right, to figure this out.
Yeah, and the one thing to consider too is the reason why a lot of people will opt to cancel the M&V term after a few years is at that period of time you'll know that the system was designed properly. Everything worked that it was supposed to, and you'll see that if there was something wrong in the design and the construction or something like that, you will see fairly quickly. Obviously, things can happen long term, but you'll be able to see and you'll be able to make that determination if there's something grossly wrong, if you wanted to maintain the M&V or if you wanted to cancel it. Long term, you still have warranties on the equipment. The panels have themselves a product warranty that's 12 years and a performance guarantee that's 25 years. So there are warranties that are in place for those components. So if something's not working as it's supposed to, because that's the thing, if you already knew the system was designed properly, everything's working the way it's supposed to, and then you have something that fails that's in warranty, then you'll be able to get that replaced. And there's a few different terms in the warranty, but they'll either directly replace it, they will fix it, or they will give you a depreciated value towards getting a new one based upon how long that panel had been there. And then it would just be the cost of getting a new panel put in. So going over the wastewater treatment plant. So the cost of the wastewater treatment plant in total is $2,967,000. In the first year, that's generating 889,000 kilowatt hours. So the avoided cost in year one is $179,000. From that, 136,000 is coming from solar, whereas 42,000 is coming from the rate change. We're modeling the same 5% escalation. The expenses in year one for the wastewater plants, $35,000. And so this slide shows the 25-year total avoided cost, which is that's $7 million. But when you take out the finance costs and any of like the operating costs, the 25-year net avoided cost, the total positive cash flow is $1.3 million. And then in addition to that, then you have the investment tax credit that is valued at $700,000 to $1 million.
So we're looking at these costs separately, but we're looking at the savings as a total. Is that correct? So when we're looking at the savings and we're saying we're going to save, $9 million almost, but we're also looking at the 80K plus the 35K plus per year, and that's if we decided, and that's on the 5-year scale that you guys have included into this, not dragging it out farther than 5 years. And that doesn't, that includes in the 5 years the 3% escalator, is that correct?
Yes, yes, it is escalated and it's shown in all those totals. Just to summarize some of the project benefits. So as Sean had mentioned, we were able to get in an application for the NEM 2.0 tariff. So this project is grandfathered into the NEM 2.0 tariff compared to what is currently now NEM 3.0. And just first off, before I go any further, does anyone have any questions about what that means? Okay, just wanted to make sure. No worries. So in addition to that, hedging, where this project allows you to hedge against future PG&E rate increases, because you're stabilizing for every one of those kilowatt hours that's being generated, you're stabilizing your costs. Whereas what we've seen recently is 10, 15 plus % rate increases from PG&E. So you're stabilizing those your cost for energy for the kilowatt hours that you're generating to hedge against PG&E's future rate increases. You're also capturing the investment tax credit at a historic high. In addition to just capturing it at a historic high, you're also utilizing it in getting it in the 2-year window where public agencies are actually able to get the direct pay option, which prior to the IRA or the Inflation Reduction Act was not, that just didn't happen. This project also reduces the long-term impacts of future water rate increases. And the way that this contract is structured, as well as the way that the notice to proceeds are structured, they allow for flexibility with construction activities and start dates. So what that means is we can issue a contract that can lock us in and get ready to move forward. But if there are certain tasks that the city is ready for JCI to move forward with, whereas they're not ready for others, we can custom make a notice to proceed that allows for limited mobilization, but at the same time reduces any risk to the city for anything that's past that. As well, it helps mitigate the timeline for permitting in the NEM 2.0 deadline, because once we submitted and had that application approved, there is a timeline that we have to meet. We have to get this project constructed by December of 2025 to maintain the NEM 2.0 status. So we have time, but we do have to plan accordingly to be able to get everything done in the timely fashion. And that concludes my portion. Are there any other questions that you all have for me? Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me, and if there are any other questions that come up, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you for your time.
My turn.
Your turn, Dan.
Mayor, I'd like to start out my presentation by asking for a 5-minute break, for a bathroom break.
Sure. How about we all do that, take a 5-minute break?
Just 5 minutes. Let's go.
No, I can't find it. I'm looking over it. Actually, it's one of, it's actually on our 3K because the 80K is only one. The other one's 45K. So we're looking at both of those. So to take us from actually, so for that, we should, if we choose not to use it, but if we choose to use it, it's actually a block. So like if you take that one, let's just take one of 3K. I think it goes gonna go. Take that times 25.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get this meeting started again.
Mayor, thank you for that break. One thing I want to acknowledge is we have been working a long time to get this team together. Brian drove here today from Santa Rosa, and of course I came from Walnut Creek. You came from San Francisco. And finally, I mean, we have the A team here, so I'm glad we finally got to this point. I'm going to go through my slides quickly. Benefits of solar. Brian basically covered these. One of the things in this third bullet, the way I've written this, enables savings for capital improvement projects. And I'm going to get into that more into my presentation. Savings for capital improvement projects. Looking at the overview, Brian already mentioned the benefit of being in the NIM 2 program. One tangible difference between NIM 2 and NIM 3 is that in the older program, you can move energy across months, and that's what PG&E took away in SoCalGas as well. It is so valuable to be able to generate energy in 1 month and then be able to use it in another month, which is what the 2 program still enables for the city. One point that Sean touched on that I'm going to elaborate on alone is the economic benefit of this project must be evaluated over its entire term. Near-term savings are helped by the investment tax credit. Without the investment tax credit benefit, over the first decade, there really isn't any savings because of the cost of the project and the cost of financing. Moving on. So Brian touched on this. A key component of the economic analysis is that PG&E rates will increase 5% per year every year for the next 25 years because it's the increasing cost of power that enables the project to be economic. Now, historically, going back decades, the escalation rate for PG&E hasn't been 5%, it's been more like 3%. However, as everyone knows, in the past few years, it's been 10 and 15 and 20%. The question is, what will it be into the future? We've used 5%. And everyone at this point is comfortable with that. Another key assumption, no extraordinary costs to complete the project, and also that ITC money will be received, about $2.9 million total. For the water plant, as Sean mentioned, in order to make the economics work, we are borrowing $1 million of existing project fund, which will then be offset by the $2.1 million in ITC. So that money will show up in 2 or 3 years, and so 2.1 minus 1 is 1.1. So the water system is still $1.1 million ahead, but it used $1 million of existing project fund money to get started. Savings during the first 10 years, actually for both water and wastewater, there really isn't any because the benefit of the project is in the latter years. With the exception, again, of the ITC money, I'm going to show you a graph in a couple of slides that gives a picture of this. I know it's so hard with all these numbers. So, Brian showed you an example. I'm going to show you year 12 and year 20. So in year 12, you see, I picked 12 because it's about $1 million. We're paying PG&E $1 million less than we would have because the value of that solar power in year 12 is about $1 million. From the $1 million, I'm not done. Back, Larry. Thank you. From the $1 million, there's the operation, maintenance, and the lease cost. That's 52. There's no warranty cost out at year 12 because it's over. Remember, it's over at year 4. So you subtract the 52,000 and then subtract another 773,000, which is the debt service. So 12 years into it, the benefit is $187,000. Let me qualify the $187,000. Because of the debt service ratio, debt service coverage requirement, it's about $187,000 because we have to collect about $180,000 more than we need because the bonds exist. We've talked about this in the past when we've talked about bonds. When you are dealing with bonds, you have to collect a little bit more money than you need to pay for the bonds to satisfy the covenants of the bonds themselves. So the $187,000 that I'm showing right there is needed for debt service coverage. So it's in rates anyway. Finally, going to 20, you see things improve out at year 20, where the net benefit is almost $600,000. And I think the next slide is a summary statement. Brian touched on some of this. One thing I'm adding here is that if you took the benefit of the entire project and brought it all the way back to the beginning, this thing called net present value is $3.6 million. That's the benefit of $8.8 million over 25 years, adding the $1.1 million of ITC. When you bring it all the way back to the beginning, $3.6 million. So now here, everyone can understand this. So this is the cumulative cash benefit over the life of the project. And what you see there is if it wasn't for the ITC benefit in year 3, you basically wouldn't have much savings until you got out to year 10. The reason the numbers don't increase, the reason the bars are the same height, 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 to 9, is because there's really no additional savings each of those years. It's close to zero. But the benefit starts to show up in the latter years. And that's why it's so important that those panels operate in the latter years, which is a good reason to stress test the model, which I did. So I added the cost of replacing all the inverters at year 18, $250,000, and that is inflated. That is the inflated cost of inverters 18 years out. I assumed the panels started to fail. Years 10 through 14, 2%, 15 through 19, 8% failure, and then 20 to 25, 10 to 20 to 30 to 50% failure to see if this thing would still work. I even went further. Rather than using a 5% escalation factor for PG&E, I used 3%. What you end up with at the end is basically a break-even project. So stressing it to the max, if you will, if you would accept this as a severe stress, we are break-even at 25 years. Going to the sewer plant, it's similar. Although the project can be fully funded with bond money, it doesn't need the additional bump using project funds. So the savings, again, is later in the project. Next slide. So it's $1.3 million over 25 years, plus $800,000, bring it all back to the present $1.1 million. And there's the chart. You see, this is a different scale, only up to 2.5 million, but it looks basically just the same. Next slide. So now to talk about rates. I'm moving from what the project does to what rates do around the project. So I already mentioned we did the last 5-year rate increase in 2020. City Council approved rate increases starting November of 2020 through the last rate increase, which isn't until this November. We're not even there yet. So for water and sewer on November 1st, 2024, it's a 3% increase, just essentially an inflationary increase that was built into the 2020 rate study. Next. Without the solar projects, water would need to be reset next spring for 2025. So the year that we're in right now is 24, 25. The next year is 25, 26. So the rates are good through this winter from the old rate study. They would need to be reset next spring for the next fiscal year. The issue that's created with the solar project is we need to demonstrate that we have appropriate rates for the next 5-year period sooner. It doesn't mean that we're making the rates higher sooner. It just means we have to set the rates sooner. Setting them now instead of next spring. So the amount for water, what it looks like right now, over the next 5-year period, 4% per year for water, 3% per year for sewer, essentially to follow inflation. And that is with or without solar. So in order to proceed with this, City Council would need to support moving ahead with setting the rates, but setting rates that wouldn't be put in place until July of 2025, over a year away, and for the next 5 years thereafter. Because we need to be able to show that the appropriate revenue, the appropriate net income is there to support the project over that 5-year period. But not setting rates higher. And I got through this very quickly. I'm sure you're going to have questions. That's just what I said. I would have to come back with specific proposed rates for the next 5-year period. With City Council support, staff would issue a 218 notice to all residents for rates that became effective July of 2025 and thereafter. Wait the 45 days, come back and have a rate hearing. And it wouldn't be until after that that the bond finance could proceed. And Rob and Bud can elaborate on that. So going back to the beginning statement, the projects pencil out, but they have to be evaluated over 25 years. The benefit is in the latter years. And that is the end of what I have to say at this point. Questions, discussion, complaints?
So when I listened to the previous, back in 2020, when you guys did the last water get together, I should say, I thought I heard that it was a 40% increase with 16%, 8%, 8%, and then 8%, and the 3% was for inflation, and 5% was for personnel, which that was the 8 and 8% that were added in, which would make it 40%. But what you're saying now is that we're only going to have a 3% in the next one. Is that correct?
What's 3% per year to follow inflation?
No, I'm talking about the 2024, the one that's going to hit 11/1/2020.
Yeah, it's 3%.
The one from last time. It's only 3% because when I was listening to the prior presentation, I'm pretty positive it said that it was going to need a total of 40% increase to meet debt services, which I think were like 1.2 that you needed. And it said with that, yeah, I think that's what it said. And it said, the reason that you said that was because if we did that, we would be able to get back some money. That's where I got the number of the 1.6 million that would come back excess, come back to projects. And so if we do, what you were talking about was, just the 3%, the 4%, 3%, and 3%, that doesn't really take into effect the 5% that you were talking about in this last one that was having to do with personnel, and then 3% for inflation, which you had said was kind of a normal thing for cities. So I'm wondering, is this going to be enough moving forward with that? And then also my other question, it might not even be for you, is how do we know what this is without knowing what the bond rates are going to be? Because those bond rates we don't even get those until those suckers are sold. So we can't tell what those rates are ahead of time. How do we know anything right
Well,
now?
these other guys are going to talk about
I
that.
understand, but they aren't going to be able to tell us until they're sold either. Because they go to people with money and then they tell them, hey, you know, we want to sell these, and then those people commit. But until that point, and a lot of times they aren't done all at the same time, they're done over time. And when they're done over time, then that means that those numbers can change. And I don't know how people would think that now is a good time to borrow money, because what I look at, interest rates are horrible. I wouldn't borrow money. I won't even get a new car right now because they want too much on interest rates. And then I guess just to follow up with another question is, does this bond that we would talk about is this a separate bond, or are we talking about refinancing our other bond into this? And also, what's the balance on that previous bond that we have?
I'm going to defer to Rob and Bud on some of that details. They'll probably be able to answer every question that you have right now.
Perfect.
So
Yeah, no, I
we can
appreciate
definitely
it.
answer that for you.
Councilman, unless the other councilmen have questions, it'd probably be good to let the financial guys talk
Sure,
and then,
no
yeah.
problem.
Good evening, council members. I have two quick slides just discussing the financing that we'll go over, and then we'll go into the cash flow model at the end and answer any questions about existing bonds or future bonds. So on this first slide, this is related to the water enterprise. And basically what our group is here today to do is to tell you that this project is financeable. Starting with the water enterprise, on the slide we show the projected sources and uses of funds for a water revenue bond. The water revenue bond and the sewer revenue bond would be issued separately from the 2021 bonds that are outstanding. Those bonds would not be refinanced. Those bonds are locked in at very attractive interest rates, and refinancing those bonds at higher rates would not make economic sense. So new bonds that are issued would be issued on what we call a parity basis, meaning that the investors for the new bonds will have the same security level as the investors for the existing bonds. In talking about the need for the next cycle of rate increases, that relates to the new bonds being able to be issued as parity bonds. Without future rate increases approved, the only way that these bonds could be issued would be on a subordinated basis, meaning that the investors for the new bonds would have a position behind the investors for the existing bonds, and that would come at a much higher rate of interest on the bonds. So it is imperative that if this project is approved and it's financed, that it is done so on a parity basis, because it'll save millions of dollars in interest payments over the life of the bonds. So looking at the sources and uses for the water enterprise, there's two sources of funds: the amount financed, which at this point is estimated in the approximate amount of $9.4 million, and the cash contribution from the water enterprise's 2021 bond project fund. The cash contribution is required so that the cash flows work out in the early years. Without that contribution, the water revenue bond does not pencil out. The uses of funds are shown below. The first is the project fund. That's the cost of the water project as outlined by Johnson Controls. The second line item is the city contingency fund in the amount of $400,000. That is essentially a pot of money that the city can use to self-insure against cost overruns, change orders, things like that. This number was suggested by Johnson Controls as a very safe and reasonable number for a city contingency, but ultimately the city can decide whether or not to include a contingency and how much it would wish to include. The next line item is the capitalized interest fund. And what the capitalized interest fund primarily does is it makes the first bond payment so that those monies don't have to come out of water enterprise operating funds. And that's important because in the first year after the project is approved, it is being constructed and installed, and it is not yet avoiding any costs. So solar projects are almost always issued with capitalized interest to pay the interest in the first year. In addition, there is a small amount of capitalized interest that will be used in years 2 and 3 to help meet various bond covenants. In year 2, approximately 25% of interest will be covered with the capitalized interest fund, and in year 3, approximately 15% of the interest will be covered with the capitalized interest fund. The next line item is the debt service reserve fund. This is a reserve fund for the water bonds, and this is essentially the insurance for the investors, so that if the city is unable to make a payment can be made from the debt service reserve fund. This is something that will be required to sell the water bonds because they do not currently have an investment grade rating. So
That was gonna be my question. What is our rating?
right now, your rating is below investment grade. It is BB plus. And the metrics, the interest rates, and the assumptions that we have used in this model assume that that rating will stay below investment grade. We think there is a very strong possibility that when we go to the rating agency, that the water enterprise will get upgraded to a BBB minus, which is an investment grade rating. And if we are able to achieve that outcome, there will be a significant reduction in the interest rate assumptions that we're using.
And you would use the rates increases in order to try and obtain that. Is that correct?
That, among other factors, correct. The last line item on the uses of funds is the financing charges. That includes all of the professional costs, the underwriter's discount, legal fees, etc. And then that totals a total use of funds of roughly $10.4 million. On the right side, we show the summary statistics, which includes a final maturity on April 1st of 2050 and a true interest cost for the water bonds of 5.96%. That is an estimate that was provided by Oppenheimer, the underwriter for the bonds. And as I said, it's based on a non-investment grade rating, and it's subject to change. The total net debt service, and by net debt service, I mean the debt service that would come out of the city's operating funds over the 25-year life of the bond, would be roughly $17.7 million. And of that 17.7, roughly $9.8 million is net interest.
So is this compound interest?
I don't believe that bonds compound interest. It's fixed.
How many years does the bond go over?
Right now, it's a 25-year bond with a final maturity in 2050.
Yeah, you have a declining amount that's charged interest every year that there's a principal payment made.
So what kind of interest is it called?
It's the net interest, the bond interest. It's the interest that is paid on the to pay back the cost of the return to the investors after the bonds are paid back on a yearly basis.
In the industry, we call it yield, but it is not. It does not
You're
compound
compounding-
over time.
Well, let me answer this question. Compounding interest usually would indicate that you have an interest that's paid in the first year, and then you add that, and it's compounding, so that every year you're paying a higher interest on a higher principal amount. This is a declining principal amount. It's not compounded.
So does that mean we're paying more interest up front and then it declines as it goes?
Of course, because you have more bonds outstanding. You're paying interest on, in this case, on, let's say, 9 million in bonds the first year. The second year, you're paying as principal pay. Each year, there's a principal payment made. And the next year, you're paying the interest rate on maybe 9.1 million and so on. You know, we could show you a whole debt service schedule that would show that,
It works just like a fixed rate mortgage.
just like a mortgage. You don't
Okay.
pay compound interest when you're paying your
Yeah,
mortgage.
I mean, when you get a chance, I'd like to see that debt service schedule.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
so
And by the way,
basically-
let me just make another point here too. These are estimated numbers as of right now. You're right. You're not going to set the bond rate until we're closer to the time of doing the bonds. And we get to the point now, our assumption is if this moves forward tonight, that we probably would become, the Oppenheimer would be coming to the market with the bonds probably sometime in July or August. And before there's any bonds sold, we would come back to the council, first of all, to have the bond documents approved, and then give you an estimate of where, at that point, we think the bonds are going to be priced. And then as we get closer to the pricing time, we will coordinate with staff and keep them apprised of where the market is before we pull the trigger to actually do the bonds so that we can get the best rate for that particular area. Might want to point out that we've coming off of, first of all, a few years ago, we had the lowest rates we've ever had in history. I've been doing this for well over 45 years. I've seen every rate type of interest rate type of market. And we had 20% interest rates back in 1979 and 80, and I saw those. And now we've had zero interest rates, or 1 or 2%, as recently as 2 or 3 years ago. And then the Fed decided that the inflation situation was such that they were going to raise rates, and they have been doing that up until last year. Now they've leveled off, and every indication is that the rates are going to start dropping. In fact, Chairman Powell today, the Federal Reserve, they did not change the rates where they normally would change in March. They kept the rates the same. He indicated in his comments that they're looking at 2 to 3 rate reductions over the next 6 months or so. So we feel that the timing will be very, very positive for bonds being issued when we get into July and August. So this 5.96 interest rate could conceivably be lower than that if the rates drop down. And as Rob pointed out, if we get a rating increase, which we anticipate, they will drop even further.
And can you explain what true interest cost means? Is that a number that has that's where it ends up at the end compared to where it starts? I mean, I'm not aware of the terminology.
I can explain that. It's a term that's used in bond financing, and it basically represents your mixed weighted average interest rate. Each year, each bond has a different interest rate. So the weighted average of those interest rates represents the true interest cost.
Okay, and that'll be
with all costs included.
okay, and so that will be able to be seen on the debt interest schedule.
Oh, of course. Yes. When we come back to the council for approval of the bond documents, we will have an estimated debt service schedule that will show all of that.
And when you put the last number you had up there was net interest, is there a difference between net interest and gross?
Yes, because some of the interest in this bond structure will not be paid by the city or from city operating funds. It'll be paid by money borrowed as part of the bond issue. So some of the money that you're borrowing is payments that you're going to make back to the investors.
So what's the true amount then? Not the net amount. What's the gross amount of interest? I'd like to see that number.
Yeah, I can pull that up.
And the reason I ask is I always find it interesting how cities going to get $8 million worth of savings, and the banks are going to make out like a killing off of this. We're going to make almost nothing. In fact, in certain scenarios that that Dan said, we could end up even.
The gross interest is 9.7 million.
Okay. 9.7. That's the gross.
That's the gross.
Okay, but I thought that said what it was on net. I thought that's what it said up there. Can you put that back up on the screen for me? 9.8. So 9.8, am I adding? So is that total? Like that's money, that's including money that we're paying out of the money that we're inputting, because you said that those were two separate numbers. So is the number that's being paid for by us plus the other thing that you just said, right? What was that? I asked the difference in between total net interest and the gross, and you had said that something else was funding part of it. So what
Well,
is
one way
that?
to look at it, Rob, wouldn't it be you've got 603,000 in capitalized interest. So that's the interest that the city is not paying. That's the interest that's being paid through the issue. So if your total interest is whatever it is, you just deduct the 603,000, and that'll show the net interest that's being paid by the city's enterprise fund.
Okay, and is the city going to get the debt service reserve fund back over the time?
Yes,
Very
it'll
good
make the
question.
final bond payment.
Yeah, what happens is two things. That money is invested yearly. There are arbitrage requirements that you can't earn more than the interest rate on the bonds, but you can earn up to the interest rate on your bonds when you're investing, when the trustee is investing that debt service reserve fund. So that 789,000 will sit there and earn interest over the 25 years. If it's needed to be drawn upon, which is highly unlikely, it would be used for that purpose. But assuming that everything works the way it's supposed to work and there's no draw on the reserve fund, that reserve fund will grow from that 789,000 to whatever it is. And when you get ready for the last two bond payments, that money will be used, since it's not going to be used anymore once the bonds are paid off. The last payment or the last payment and the payment right before that would be paid for by the proceeds of collapsing the debt service reserve fund.
So let me
It's
ask
your
you,
money, it's your money, it benefits the city, and then is used as a final payment on the bonds.
so if the city's gonna make, what, $8 or $9 million off of this in savings, but yet the total net interest on this is 9.8, how does the city benefit out of this? It seems like that we're actually gonna be paying for this.
The 8.8 million comes after all interest and principal has been paid.
Oh, that
Yeah.
comes after that. Okay, and so
Yeah.
since that's the case, why are rate fees, and why is it so important that we raise rates then? Because obviously, if Johnson Controls is like, hey, you know what, we think that you're gonna save this much, and then, you know, you guys are thinking we're gonna save this much, what's the deal with having to put the rate increases in? And if you're saying that the rate increases are not tied to the solar project, then why do we need to do it?
Let me dive back in on that one. So I appreciate your concern. We would need to do a water rate increase anyway next spring for the next fiscal year. We would need to do a sewer rate increase in the next few years. We need to set the rate sooner for the effective date of July 1st, 2025 to enable bond funding.
I understand, but I'm wondering why. Why are those two things not related on one side? You're saying, well, it's not for the solar, but then on the other side, hold on, we got to do it or we ain't going to get the financing. Why? I want to know the reason why.
The answer that is not helpful to the project is that the savings and the project are in the later years.
So this is what I take from that, and I hate to be blunt about this, is that the financiers don't feel like in the later years that this is a guaranteed thing. And so they're thinking to themselves, we're going to guarantee we get our money by you setting rates ahead of time. And so then I'm saying, okay, well, the citizens, the ratepayers are the ones that are taking the huge risk here on this project. And I'm not saying it's not a good idea. I'm just looking at it and trying to figure it all out, because that's what I do. You know, that way that the people at home listening to this understand what's going on. That's why I rarely ask questions ahead of time, because then I can't go back and look at your numbers and look at what the questions I ask and then be able to tell people the answers to that. So I apologize that sometimes this just comes out, because I was asked, hey, you want to come in earlier? And I said, no, I want to ask these questions in public so then they can answer them and then we can have it on tape. And then like you did in 2020, I can go back and kind of look at it and say, okay, now I understand what's going on. So I appreciate all your guys' tough work and, all your hard work and all your answers in all this. But I do wonder to myself, how are these two things tied together? And I know what you're saying about that, hey, the rate increases, you know, due to inflationary costs would have to happen regardless. What I'm asking is that you're asking for very specific rates now, and they don't have to be increased now, but you want us to say that we're going to. And so I just want to know the reason why.
Yeah, so there's a couple of reasons why. And the predominant reason why relates to the 2021 bonds and has nothing to do with the solar project or proposed new bonds. Under the current rate assumptions for the Water Enterprise Fund, in fiscal year 2025-26, the debt service coverage for the 2021 water bonds will be 1.13. It needs to be 1.25, or else there's a covenant violation. And that's without rate increases, without the solar project, and without any new financing. In 26-27, you're below 1-to-1 coverage.
Okay, that makes sense. So you wouldn't sign up for something that we wouldn't be able to pay for.
Correct.
Councilman, one thing we could do, Larry's prepared to put the model up on the screen. I think we'll be able to see it. I don't want to cut you short,
No,
Rob.
you haven't cut me short.
I don't know. Can you guys see that? Can you see the
Barely,
numbers?
but my glasses aren't very good, so,
Do you need me to zoom in on
I
something?
don't think, well,
yeah. When I get home, I'll look at them on the computer.
well, the one thing we can accomplish is just to show you that there's an integrated model that goes over the 25 years. So I'll just explain it. On the left side, it's the years from the beginning all the way through 25. The first columns are kilowatt hours generated by the project, and then the combined energy savings for the total dollar value. That first vertical brown column, those are the total dollar values of the energy saved. Then the next section is the different expenses for the project. And the biggest component of that is what's highlighted in green right there, which are the debt service numbers over the life of the project. Then you see total expenses and then annual cash flow. And the cumulative cash flow number is what I plotted. That's what you saw a graph of, the cumulative cash flow. In fact, that illustration right there of the cumulative cash flow is what it looks like without the ITC bump at the beginning. It's hard to see this. We will get to you the printouts of these, including the printout of the debt service numbers that you guys have done.
Can we get those emailed instead of just printed out? That way we can look at them on the computer.
Absolutely.
All right, appreciate that. Thank you.
I got a quick question. So the rate hike is over the next 5 years is pretty much our collateral guarantee?
The rate increases for water over the next 5 years are essentially the same if you do the solar project or if you don't do the solar project.
Right, but we're being told we have to for the next
when
5
let
years.
me just jump in here. When the bonds were sold, the 2021 bonds were sold, they were rated, they were sold with a covenant called a rate covenant that the debt service coverage would always be 1.25. To say it in plain language, if you have a debt service payment of $1 million, you need to show that you have net available for debt service of $1,250,000. That $250,000 stays with you. It's not spent anywhere. It remains in the system. But at the end of the year on the audit, it needs to show that it has that coverage. That's what gives comfort to the rating agency that they have given a rating on the bonds based on that, and it gives comfort to the investors that they have a coverage factor that you're not every year just earning barely enough money to make the payments, that you're earning more than enough. So in case you have a bad year, you're still covered. Again, that 250,000 stays within the system and is just extra cash for the enterprise. But every year that calculation is made, you need to have a 125 coverage. When the coverage falls below 125, there's a covenant, an agreement that was made by the city when they entered into the bond documents that if they don't have the 125 coverage, they will hire a consultant. You already have a consultant in Dan Bergman who will do an analysis, a rate analysis, and determine the rates that are necessary to bring the rates up so that that 125 coverage at a minimum is attained. And that's what happened with the 2021 bonds. By the way, one other thing on the 2021 bonds that's misunderstood is when the refunding was done, there was money left, as you said earlier, Councilman, in the project fund of the 2012 bonds, and I forget exactly the amount. It was $7 or $8 million. So that should have been spent because it's supposed to be spent over a 5-year period. So you were running the risk that there could be IRS review that could cause penalties for not having spent that money. As a result, what we did is we used that money to pay down the bonds first. And then when we did the new bonds, we brought that money back into a new project fund, same money, in the 2021 bonds, thus starting the time for when you have to spend the money. But there was no additional interest. In fact, if anything, the interest that was being paid on the 2012 bonds for that $7 million was higher than the amount that the 2021 bonds are paying. So you actually lowered the interest that's being paid on those project funds. And now those project funds apparently are going to actually be used, which is very positive.
So I have a question
Hope
about
that
that.
wasn't too confusing, but
So I have a
I
question
just
about
wanted to
that since you brought it up. So when that's, I think it was 750,000. So when that $750,000 was included in the main total, which was about $7 million, we were absolutely paying interest on that throughout the lifetime of that. So we did pay interest on money that then we turned around to use to pay down a bond. That then we turned
but no,
around
but
and got
wait,
interest
wait,
on again. It is
yeah,
absolutely, we did do that. That is a truism.
Hold on. Yes, you used the money to pay down the bond and then brought it right back in to the project fund at lower interest costs. Yes, you were paying interest on that money from 2012 until 2021. And if the money had been spent, then you would have gotten the project for that.
That's my point, is that we did
yeah.
pay interest through that entire time on that, and then we
Yes,
turned around and
absolutely.
paid off the bond
Yeah,
with it.
absolutely, you did. But you didn't pay more interest by doing the transition into the new bonds. You're now paying less interest on that money than if you had left it in the 2012 and not spent it. You were paying interest at I think 200 basis points higher amount. So it ended up being a positive given the circumstances.
I understand what you're saying. Okay, I get it.
And you did earn interest on those funds.
Okay.
Yes, and you were earning interest
offset
on those funds while it was in the
So
project.
you're saying if we would have continued to pay off that, to continue to pay the 2012 bond until the 750, and we would have took that 750 and used it on a project, that we would have paid more money at the 2012 rate than we paid for by transferring that money to the new bond. Is that correct?
You're a quick learner,
I
absolutely.
am. I'm a
correct.
very quick learner, especially when it comes to cash. I appreciate that. I appreciate you guys giving your information and listening to all the questions and whatnot. I appreciate every one of you.
Sure, thank you.
If I may, so Sean, when I think about where we are at this point, we have been working on this project for how many years? Well, was it 2016? Brian?
Yeah, it was 2016 when Johnson Controls was retained.
That's 8 years. And we're finally to a point where we're sitting here. We have worked so hard on this thing to try to make it work. The purpose tonight is to get direction from you folks, from City Council. I don't know. I mean, where do we go from here, Sean?
So before Sean answers that, I got a question for Sean. We haven't talked about that savings and what we can use that savings for. I know that we have had private discussions about this, and that my whole concern is about the rates. But I also understand that there's capital projects. So what can be done about making, either not having such high rate increases in the future and balancing that out with capital projects?
I think we'll have to look back at some of the models, but as Dan mentioned, in looking at the cash flow projections, obviously that increased cash flow is going to occur in latter years, right? And so really where that savings comes in is going to be kind of up to the council on kind of terms of how we want to manage that.
12 years from now, right?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, yes. I mean, unfortunately, the numbers just don't pencil out to say, hey, we can reduce future increases by 2% or 3% as of right now. I think there's a possibility, and Dan and I have talked about this at length, is whether or not long-term there's the ability to reduce the needed increase. We won't see decreases, but maybe depending on what those savings are down the road, there might be some. There's also the ITC money. I mean, there's ways to look at that. But yeah, there's definitely a need for capital improvements, maintenance at these facilities, as well as balancing, looking out for, the cost of doing business, right? Which equates to how much revenue do we need. So this project will show some benefit in the latter terms, but in terms of like the immediate benefit, we're looking at probably just standard rate increases based on, your inflationary percentages. Unless there's any other future, financing for projects. But other than that, you're looking probably at, like, the last 5 years have been relatively good based on inflationary costs and adjusting for the bond issue for 2021.
Yeah, I mean, it's been good. I just want to reiterate again that finally we got the water fund balance pretty far away from zero and headed in a positive place. Sean hasn't mentioned it yet. Councilman Vosberg, you were talking about excess water. We did a water transaction in February that netted the city $110,000 in 1 month. So we are doing our best to leverage the city's asset in that water contract.
So here again,
I
this brings
think-
me back to the same question of if we lowered rates and we sold more water, wouldn't that be a better idea? Because I'm telling you, people are not using water right now because it's so expensive. I don't know how that works out. I know that it doesn't work out for your actuaries, but when I look at that, I say to myself, if rates keep going up and people are being told to conserve, we're going to sell less water, which is going to continue the rates to increase. Everybody has already been on this page. We know this is going to happen. So we're exacerbating this by continuing down this path. We need to make water affordable. My goal is to lower water rates, not to increase them. That's my number one goal. I made that campaign promise. So, but I'm looking at everything that everyone has brought forward, and I'm looking at all the hard work that you guys have done. And, I need more time to look at all this stuff, and I want a full council here before we make any decisions moving forward. That's what I mean, we have two people that aren't here today that aren't in on this, and the city manager as well. I'd like everyone to get time to read over. I mean, I put out a bunch of questions, and you guys answered them all like superstars, and so I appreciate that, but now I need to go back and look at it. I don't think we need you guys to come back. I think all the questions, I ask a lot of questions, but I think we at least need these people to be able to look over the data, and our city manager to look over the data and give, people time to understand what's going on. That's my personal opinion.
That's where I'm at.
Yes, I agree. I agree with it. Now I was going to ask you a question. So we got an item on our agenda for tomorrow night that says otherwise, not 110, it says 220 at $50, not 25 for the sale and
Yes.
transfer.
Yeah, it's a continuation of the water contract with the Pleasant Valley Water Conveyance Partners under the same terms as last year, which is very good for the city. $25 for transport only and $50 if they buy water from the city.
Okay.
And there's going to be representation here tomorrow night for them.
So as we
How
go,
much water do we have left? I mean, we haven't even came close, right? Because this year we aren't really restricted, so we have the 10,000.
we're at 65% historical this year.
65%.
Yeah, and last year I think we were
Water.
at 3,700 acre foot in M&I and what we used in the city.
And we had a little excess that we were able to roll over, correct?
We
last
did
year?
request a 10% carryover. That's about the max that we can request from USBR. I don't know if we have confirmation from them on that, but we have been inquiring about, and since we did have full allocation last water year, it'd be 1,000 acre feet that we'd be able to carry over.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there could be some kind of Save Mart routine here. You go to Save Mart and one day prices are $3.99, and then they put things on sale, and then they go back up to like $7.99, right? And you're like, wow, how'd that happen? Is there any way we can lower water rates during the summertime, encourage people to use the water and see what we can do? And then come back and do your things that you're talking about?
Councilman,
don't know, I'm just throwing out ideas.
I love the idea. The problem is that people would think, oh, lower water rates, I'm going to replant my lawn. But as soon as we get back into a drought, oh, sorry,
Well,
because that's beyond price. When somebody says at the state level, for example, or at the federal level, when the water isn't available, you can't have the water.
Well, if we're not working towards having them use water and we're having them continuously conserving, then this is just going to continue to skyrocket and go up because we're going to continue to have to pay maintenance, service, Westlands, all this stuff. But yet, the more that goes up, people just use less. I see my neighbors that are like, you know what, I'm done with this, and they just turned and rocked their whole thing. So now that's water we're not selling. So then that causes everybody else that's using water to have to pay more. And so I want to go the other direction. I don't like this direction. This direction is not market productive. This is monopoly productive. And that's exactly what this is leaning into. And I don't like that. I like market production. And we do have a huge amount. We have a huge surplus here that we're able to work with. At least this year we are, because there's not drought contingencies in there. So if we didn't have a surplus in there, and the surplus would be, hey, the 65% plus the 35%, that amount, which is what, 35%, it would be just our normal usage. And our normal usage is what? Only 60% of what we're allotted. So, like, we have a huge amount that we could sell to the people. And I don't like the idea of, hold on, let's sell it to the farmers for dirt cheap. And the farmers are making, I mean, I know they're saying they don't want it, but it's just not even fair. How much money they're paying for a whole acre foot compared to how much people are paying at their house. People are paying more at their house than the farmers are paying, if you look at it in that aspect.
Well, I mean, they're not buying treated water, but I think the challenge is, and we've experienced this in the last couple of years, especially with wholesale water, is that the water is valuable based on what's available. And when you have a year that's 100%, we were scrambling to find people to try and buy water because our goal was just to be able to show historical use.
Well, and so that's where I'm going with this. And so that's interesting how you told this about the value, because the value to the person compared to the value at the farmer is way different. Why are we making the value at the person highway robbery and making the value at the farmer super cheap? That's not right. That is not right at all. The value at the person should be what we're focusing on. And that value changes with the amount of surplus that we have, comparatively to how much we're charging, comparatively to how much people will pay. And right now, we are charging the people an arm and a leg, and we're letting other people have it for super cheap. It doesn't even make sense on a market scale of looking at that. If I was the rate customers, I would be mad. I'd be like, it's not fair. And let me just put this out there. I love selling water to Harris and all those farms. I think it's a great idea. I mean, we need to help them have water too. But the idea that our people are paying so much for water while we're turning around and cutting deals with these people for not very much on water. And I know that they're turning around telling us we don't even need the water. Well, fine, don't take it then. Don't take it. 110,000, I mean, what's that? You know, what does that do to our rate structure?
Well, I mean, it helps operations.
Well,
I mean,
let's say we lowered the rate on people, and we could make 400,000 in extra dollars by lowering the rate and encouraging people to water. We'd make more money that way.
I think it's risky.
Well, I think what we're doing now is risky. I think doing this solar thing's risky. Look at the numbers. They think it's risky too. That's why they're requiring rate increases in order for us to do it. And even your own numbers, we could break out even at this entire thing. Everything's a risk. I just think the people deserve to get a win. I want the people to have, to be able to pay less. We've had extreme increases. I'm only one person. I'm just putting out my opinion because, but I think it is a risk. You're right. Anything's a risk. So I'm not making an agenda item for that. I'm just saying something for people to think about. So I appreciate listening.
I got a question for Dan. Do you happen to know what the rate is going to be in the future for the farmers having to pull water out of their own wells? I know they're going to be getting charged for it pretty soon. Do you know what that cost is?
That's probably built into Westlands. Westlands is the one, either Westlands or
it's
the
the
Pleasant
state.
Valley.
Yeah.
That would,
Surface water, like the city's contract water, has increasing value to them.
Yeah,
because
I'm
of the
talking about the
recharge.
groundwater, not the surface water.
Well, what I'm
talking
getting
about
at is-
the aquifer underneath.
What I'm getting at is the well water that they're pumping out is becoming expensive to them because they have to buy surface water to recharge the wells, like Gladstone and the farmers are doing. They built that giant rectangular pond. You can see it from the road. And the idea was for that to recharge the aquifer, which makes well water more expensive. And that's water they're buying from the city and from other people. So to your point, Councilman Vosberg, what City Council and the public should be looking for, and staff, is that when the city's wholesale water is sold, that the city's getting maximum value for it. The transfer water, that's just because they're piggybacking on the city's transportation agreement with Westlands. That's $25 right now. But it's one thing, and the way the contract is written that you're going to be asked to approve tomorrow night, the city can amend that contract anytime it wants. If the city discovers that water's worth more than a $50 premium, you can change it.
And we've been monitoring that a lot more since we paid $1,800 an acre foot. We've been monitoring that a lot more to look at the value as the market changes, what farmers' allocations are, what the demand for that water is. And so we've been trying to monitor that more because we benefit from selling it rather than holding the cards. And there's certain times of the year where that water is desirable, and there's certain times of the year where they don't need it. And so we're monitoring that, trying to maximize our allocation of water, which is to our benefit. But if we ask too much, or the market may not be able to withstand it, and we'll be left, okay, would we rather have the 100,000 or nothing?
So
Right. And
are
so I
they
think that's
using
where-
this water to recharge for Sigma for their own, is that what they're doing? Is they're buying water from us at this cheap rate, putting it back into the ground so then they can use their own water at a later date for cheaper? Because I've always wondered, like, what are they doing with our water? Where does it go?
Well, some of it could be that, yeah. Or for just farming operations. It depends on the time of the year.
And I'm pro farmer. I'm down to sell them water. And you know what? The general public does not understand all the numbers we're talking about. What they see is the amount of water that we're selling, for what price they're selling, for what they're paying at their house. And they're just, and of course people are unhappy about it. And a lot of people, it's amazing. It's weird how things, 2 years ago when we were in a full drought, in my entire side of town was like, I'm in a water, I don't care if it costs $1,000 a month. Huh. Interesting, right? And I'm like, you go. But now, a lot of them have torn their stuff out and decided $1,000 a month wasn't worth it.
Well,
So-
the cost of treated water is substantial. It doesn't cost anything to transfer water to a farmer or to sell water to a farmer, but it costs money to treat that water, to deliver that water to every resident. It takes these employees, it takes the power, it takes everyone. It takes the public works employees, the distribution system that has to be maintained. All of those costs are built in to those rates. We're not trying to gouge the residents. I'm a ratepayer. You're a ratepayer. And I think that the big thing is that when we look at the numbers and we look at what we're spending, and you also see the grand scheme of the deficiencies and the maintenance and the capital needs for the system, and we're still having to raise rates and not being able to account for those improvements, that money has to come from somewhere. And it's unfortunate, water is expensive. But I think it's fully transparent about where that money goes and why it costs that much. But I don't know if I fundamentally agree that lowering rates is going to generate, because it won't fundamentally increase revenue unless all of a sudden we're spending more money. But then we have the state that wants to adopt new regulations that's telling us to conserve, which would be we'd be doing contrary to that, which then could lead to $1,000 a day fines from the state for not complying with conservation measures that we're still learning a lot about.
Well, it's
right now.
interesting because we have an expert right here who knows how to hedge losses and bend bets and risks. He's doing it with natural gas right now. Buying natural gas at certain times and saying, okay, if I buy it here, here, and here, even if we pay more here, we're going to make out. Can we do that with the water? Can we sell it to people in that fashion and say, okay, if we sell water at this rate, and this rate, and then, yeah, you know what, maybe we didn't make out here, but maybe we encourage water usage in the wintertime.
But that's on a wholesale side. We're talking about actually like almost the retail side of water.
But it's the same kind of concept. It's
But there's
a
less
concept.
costs on the wholesale because you're buying it in bulk rather than selling treated water. Just like when gas comes into the system, it's all the costs associated with delivering that product, charging meters, reading meters, maintaining that system, improving that system. Those are the costs that are different than what the wholesale cost is. If it didn't cost us anything to deliver gas to every single customer, we could divide the wholesale cost to deliver it to every person. If we didn't read the meters, we just let people use whatever. But you've got all those operational costs that have to be included.
Well, I'm just thinking we're going to see 2 or 3 months, maybe the next 2 months, we're going to see water usages jump. And then I think people are going to come to their senses and understand that, oh my gosh, look how expensive this bill is. And then we're going to see the usage go down. And if we see that, then we aren't better off. It's a catch-22. I know it's a catch-22 both ways, but like only focusing on one side of, hey, let's just raise rates, to me doesn't seem right. Like we're not even trying the other idea of like, hey, if we lower rates, will people use more? I'm run a lot of businesses and I've watched this happen, that if you have skyrocketed prices, people, and it's all about elasticity. What is the elasticity of water, I guess? How much will? On gas rates, on like gas for your car, it seems like hell, people pay $5 a gallon, no big deal. Doesn't matter to them, they'll continue to drive. It's extremely one-sided. But on other things, like a pack of gum, if it was 25 cents and now it's $1.25, people stop buying gum. So I wonder where that is on water.
But the challenge with that is if you do that and you all of a sudden everyone starts using, we're using 8,000 acre feet of water, but when the Bureau cuts us or the state cuts us down to health and safety, we're going to be back to 3,000 acre feet, 3,200 acre foot.
But the ratepayer will be better off, and the more money we get into our...
We'll be at significant, that'll cut our revenue in half.
Well, yeah, but we'd get the revenue to begin with ahead of time, though. We'd make money if it worked. If it worked, we'd make money ahead of time. And it'd be like, oh, okay, and then, look at what we're doing now. We're basically doing the same thing no matter what. We save, and then they come back and say you need to save again, and you need to save again, and you need to save again. And every single year, like when Mayor Ramsey said, hey, we can't even pay the bonds we have because we can't sell the water. And that's because people ain't buying the water. I don't know. It's not just up to me, but I'm just, like I said, I'm putting my opinion out there. I'd love to try something that would be out of the box, might encourage people to use water. I don't know.
When do we need to make a decision on this? Does it have to be tonight?
No, in all honesty, it does not have to be made tonight. I'm not going to make you guys have to make a decision. I would like some direction in terms of what the council would like to see.
All the numbers.
I think based on the information that's being conveyed and, I like at least being able to have the discussion. It just depends on what the council needs from staff to be able to help better make an informed decision. I know that you guys would like to see at least the cash flow data for those. We can kind of provide some of the financing documents or at least what's anticipated to allow you guys to make a decision. I think we've been fully open, at least in terms of kind of what the project looks like and with the financing, where the savings is really gonna be. And it's towards the latter part of the project. And we kind of started with that discussion just to kind of preempt it. But ultimately, yeah, the council's gonna have to make a decision. And we have, as much as you don't like or want the answer about having to look at rates, the bottom line is we won't be able to get financing without having some type of rate structure in place moving forward, because it already shows in the rate schedule and in our actual finances that we won't be able to meet existing coverages on the 2021 bonds if we don't show the investors that there's rates moving forward.
That's why I asked. That's roughly our collateral, is raising the rates for the next 5 years is our collateral. It's to show good faith. It's collateral.
To show that we're solvent.
Yes.
Right. And also we're saying that we're committing to what we said we were going to commit to in that covenant, as well as the explanation about the parity and how we're having to parity both these bonds. If we don't do that, I don't know if a rate increase. You'd have to answer that question, Rob, but whether a rate increase would be required if you don't do it on a parity basis, but then that triggers a high interest rate on that financing. And you can see we're already spending $9 million in interest to finance this project. So it's kind of that balance where the rates, we'll be back in spring anyways. As much as
Sean, if you don't raise the rates and you had to do it try to do it on a subordinate basis, nobody would buy those bonds. Or if they did, we'd be looking at interest rates, and I can let Nikki weigh in on this if she is still on. It probably at 7 or 8%, which would be crazy. Then nothing works. So
that's kind of the challenge. That's why. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Nikki.
Oh, I was going to say I'm still on and listening, and that's correct, Bud.
Yeah.
So I know it's a challenge, but we wanted to basically, that's one of the purposes why we brought this to you guys. We wanted you to understand, what needs to occur in order for us to continue to proceed.
So what I need for myself is all of the data that's been presented tonight, sent to my email. Since we didn't get it ahead of time, I couldn't really look at it, over it. And then also, I want historical usage on how much we've sold in water for the last 10 years and how much what those rates were at that point in time that we sold them, so that I can know how much money we made in those 10 years, the last 10 years, so I can look at those and say to myself, okay, well, did we make more? I don't know the answers to these, that's why I'm asking. So that's personally what I want in order to make a decision moving forward, and then to bring it back. I wouldn't want to require everyone to come back. The council, the members that didn't come, I know for a fact Lonnie will watch the meeting, and so will Manny. So we don't need everyone to come back, but we do need I need time to look at it, to understand it, to have conversations with Sean, to have conversations with Marissa. That way we can fully understand it and then bring it back. That would be my direction, that we get the data and then bring it back. And that's not counting what anyone else would
I
want.
suggest the same thing, but I think we might need to go a little further back, maybe possibly 20 years, because there was a change back in the 90s. So I want to see what the difference is in the last 20 years versus what it was
Just on
back
wholesale,
then.
on wholesale water?
No, I want to see what our rates were and how much water we sold. I want to know how much water we sold for those years.
Do you mean the wholesale transactions?
No, how much we sold to our customers.
Okay.
How much did we
Well,
sell to our customers?
Yeah, we have that.
I think Dan's got a graph for that.
I'm sure he does. That's great. And then all the data that we got today, because this is good data. And like I said, I appreciate everybody coming and giving this info, because this is very informative. And anybody that's at home watching, which I don't know who is, hopefully they're paying attention to what's going on, because I've asked every question that I can think of in the book. So, that's important, and you guys have been open and transparent in this, and I appreciate that. And I know that I'm absolutely one of the worst when it comes to asking questions. Dan's sitting here thinking he's going to get home tonight.
The only reason I'm asking for the 20 years, I want to make sure that we don't get to the point where it's use it or lose it, because that's happened before in this town. You guys don't know about it, but it's happened here before.
So I do have 20 years of data.
Okay. Thank you.
And what's interesting is you see both droughts in the historical data, 2015 and then again 2 years ago.
Okay. Thank you. Any more questions? Any questions for us, from you?
So if I could ask a couple, I just wanted a couple questions to kind of see where the council's at right now. One is there, in terms of the solar itself, like the actual workings of like kind of what JCI proposed, is there any concerns or is there any issues that you guys may have with the actual project itself?
Yeah, the
Or is it
property.
a combination of the project and how we integrate financing into it and where that kind of balances? Because I'm just trying to see where everyone's at in terms of what we need to kind of focus on when we kind of come back.
Hey,
to
you're saying 7 acres, but if we have to do an adjustment, we're not making enough energy to cover our costs. Shouldn't we be getting a little bit more than 7 acres to expand if we needed to?
That kind of ship's already sailed. I mean, and in the reality, now we're in NEM3, so you're not adding extra panels. You're not going to be able to qualify for the NEM2 by extending it. We actually looked at the NEM3 program and kind of compared it to this program, and the costs skyrocket because the batteries that you have to have now, similar to like a home. So this is pretty much where we're at in terms of the constraints. But yeah, I mean, the 7 acres, the site locations have kind of been established, and so, but the inner workings and the parameters of the project, just wanted to make sure you guys were comfortable with at least what's been presented by Johnson Controls. But I know there's a whole nother avenue and a whole nother facet of financing this thing too.
So just curious, because I have to ask, has this project been set out or bid out to other companies? This solar project, has other companies besides Johnson Controls been able to bid on
This
this
is
project?
going under kind of the design build, I gotta remember the government code section, but basically it's kind of under the ESCO, the energy efficiency side, where you don't have to like go after formal bid. You can actually procure and actually go out to basically do it as a design build.
Well, you know, no offense to Johnson Controls, and I've worked with them from a long time, but isn't it always a good idea to get multiple bids for the taxpayers' benefit, to find out, you know, and to see what other options are out there? I mean, I know other people have come to me and asked me about solar projects, lots of them. It's like the biggest market thing that's going on right now.
Yeah, and all of them would sole source it.
What does that mean?
They would do it as if we entertain that with another company, they would want exclusivity too. That's kind of how a lot of the energy efficiency construction contractors work, and they operate under government code section.
Well, I mean, no offense to Johnson Controls, but I don't like that. That sounds like a monopoly of, hey, I got a interest, or I've been friends with these people for a long time, so I'm going to get into there. And the benefit of ratepayers, that's not the best interest of a ratepayer. The best interest of a ratepayer is to get multiple people to bid on it. I know as a city that we do things like this all the time, and I don't like it at all when we do it with anybody. I don't like the fact that we have contracts with, I think, everything. I mean, there was a lawsuit one time where Fresno Unified was told they had to bid on pencils, because they weren't allowed to just go out and buy pencils from one place. And that's how I would be, because that's how you get the best savings. So no offense to Johnson Controls. I know they've worked with the city for a long time, and I know they've done a lot of things with us, but I just always think to myself that, you know, the benefit to the ratepayer is always to get multiple bids, but
I can actually comment a little bit on that. So Johnson Controls wasn't just like, someone didn't just start talking to the city, and the city didn't just decide, oh, you know what, I like you, Johnson Controls. The city did go out through procurement. The city issued a request for qualifications, and they evaluated multiple contractors, and Johnson Controls was selected. But the delivery method, instead of a design bid build approach where you have an engineer that you pay up front and they design plans, and then you have bids come in for the construction, opposed to that, they were utilizing a design build construction method.
so there was an RFQ sent out.
It was a long time ago. That's why.
So, but other people had an opportunity to
It
jump
was
in
in
on this.
Yes.
It was in 2015.
Yeah.
We had a pretty thorough process.
Okay,
And
just
there
making
were-
sure. Thanks.
And all of our subcontractors have been competitively bid.
Okay, all right, just making sure.
So we'll get you guys.
Yeah, I don't have any issues with anything that I've heard with the contractor or with, everyone's been very open and transparent and given us information. I think we just need to look over it and, you know, have time with it.
Yeah, we can get you all the information, and then we'll reschedule something up to and make sure that ensure that everyone's going to be here for that next meeting. Cool.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to our next item, announcements, city manager's announcements. None? Councilman?
Assistant city manager is none.
None, and I have none as well. Any future agenda items? Okay, we'll save that for tomorrow night. We have no closed session items. With that being said, we're going to adjourn the meeting until March 21st, which is tomorrow night.